Okay, we're going to move into Committee of the Whole. We have 9 items today, so I'm going to move through this very briskly because we also have an executive session after that. So if I move through quickly, please nobody take it personally if I move you on. So we're going to do a slight adjustment to our agenda. We are going to change items 1 and 2 for Committee of the Whole, and we are going to start with the Bellingham-Whatcom County Commission Against Domestic Violence Annual Report, and I'm going to turn it over to Susan Marks, the Executive Director, and I don't have to worry about her lollygagging.
Yes. Lucky for you all, I speak very briskly. So I've been told, though, that if you just pay close attention, you can keep up. So don't write your grocery list while I'm talking. Just focus, and we'll be okay. So I'm Susan, and I'm the Director of the Commission, the Bellingham-Whatcom County Commission Against Domestic Violence, and I come in front of you every year to talk a little about the Commission and our work and some of our current projects, and just to keep you informed because you have formed us and you are one of our primary funders, so we want you to be aware of what's happening with this Commission. So a little reminder, we were formed in 1998 by a joint resolution between the City of Bellingham and Whatcom County, and we were really formed as a show by the City and the County, the Mayor and the County Executive and the councils, that this community is committed to doing something about domestic violence at the macro level, not only providing services as are provided in this community by various community agencies, but by working together in a comprehensive way to end domestic violence. In 2006, all of the other municipalities in Whatcom County passed ordinances of support. So we are now kind of officially supported by every community in Whatcom County. And our role, as I said, we work at the macro level. We're providing leadership and efforts to prevent and reduce domestic violence. So we're bringing together leaders from throughout the county to implement projects, put out policies and resources, provide education and training, and bring in new programs as are found nationally to be best practice, to work on how our coordinated responses, to continue increasing communication, and to promote best practices and for those people who are serving victims, perpetrators, and children, so that we don't do that. We are providing support to all of those agencies and professionals who do. And we're also working on leading efforts to prevent domestic violence before it starts. So our commission members, typo, it should say by City of Bellingham right there. I recycle my PowerPoints and update them and forgot to update that. So we have 3 staff members from the City of Bellingham are on the commission as a result of their role. So Chief Cook, Darlene Peterson, and Peter Rafato are all commission members. And then we have several that are appointed by the mayor to serve on the commission. So those current community members who are appointed are Rhiannon Bardsley, Sherry Emerson, Katie Plewa Olvera, Alan Artman, and Ken Levinson. And we currently have 2 city positions open that we're recruiting for, and hopefully we'll have someone recommended for soon. And the full roster is in your packets. But basically the idea, again, is that we have community leaders from different criminal justice, faith communities, schools, public health, businesses, tribes, etc. So the idea is to have leaders from various sectors on the commission. I just want to touch briefly on our funding because it's something that we've been talking about a lot in the last year or two, and we'll be speaking hopefully with all of you a little more about in upcoming weeks. So our operational, basic general operating funding comes from primarily Whatcom County and the City of Bellingham, and then we get a small donation annually from the City of Ferndale as well. And then we have some federal funding for special projects, grant funding, and there's a couple ways I think the City of Bellingham kind of helps us with this grant funding. One actually is that the Bellingham Police Department, for 5 different grants we've received from the Department of Justice, they have actually acted as the applicant, so they've applied for us. They have acted as the fiscal agent, and they have managed that accounting piece for us, and we manage all the grant operational pieces, and that has been a huge helpful contribution in a way that allows us to get those grants. You have to be a government to apply, and the mayor has always signed off on those as in the memorandum of understanding, so that's been super helpful. The other thing is just having a commission, having commission members, having commission staff, I believe and have heard is what's contributing to us getting some of these fundings. So this first grant that's listed up there, they're all Department of Justice funding, but they're kind of slightly different funding sources. The first one we have received 5 times in a row, and it's a criminal justice related grant. And we have been told that we were the only community that have ever received this 5 times in a row. So we've had it for about 11 years running now because they're all multi-year grants. And one of the reasons that we continue getting this is we do a good job managing the funding that we have and implementing projects, and we can show that we have the community support. They really want to see when you apply for these that you already have people on board. And when we write the grants, we've already kind of run the idea through all of our community partners, and they've actually helped contribute to the idea. So we're not starting from scratch when we get money. We already have commitments ready to go when we get the money, so then we can start as soon as they release the funding to us. The other thing that when we get these grants is the funding. It's quite a bit that we've received over the past several years, and so there's a graph in your packet. So since 2005, we've brought in about $2.5 million of federal funding. So having this commission has leveraged a lot of this federal funding, and not all of that goes directly to us. So we kind of pass through some of it to other agencies. So this spring we sent a team. We sent someone from the City of Bellingham, someone from Whatcom County, and someone from Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Services to a training in Seattle on language access in the courts. So they got some training on best practices and requirements and policies in the state of Washington. They're bringing that back to kind of work with our court system on improving our language access. Another grant that we're going to start this fall, working with schools, the Mount Baker, Blaine, and Ferndale school districts. We got a new grant to work with those districts to do prevention work. And that grant, we have some of the funding. We're also using that funding for passing some through to Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Services, some to Northwest Youth Services, Bridget Collins Family Support Center, and then each of those 3 districts get some stipends to pay their staff to participate in trainings and events. So our funding is distributed widely, so it not only comes to us, it also supports other community agencies. And these last 2 grants actually are both school-related, and one of them, the STEP grant, we were one of only 9 sites in the nation to get it. We were a pilot site. And then the last one, the Comprehensive Youth Grant, was a continuation of that pilot grant, and out of those 9, we're the only one who got the continuation funding. We're one of only 10 sites to have that Comprehensive Youth Grant, and we're the only one on the West Coast. So again, I really feel like having all these people together and the ideas and coming together to create a really good project is what's helping us get this funding. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our projects, and the last one is related to the school work that we do, or the second to last one. So I'll talk a little bit about our strategic plan and some of the projects we have under each of them, just to give you a sense of what we do, because I heard some whispering about DV Commission and DV SAS, and people always have a hard time differentiating. So hopefully if you have a sense of a few projects, you'll see a little more what our role is in the community. So one of our strategic goals is to engage our community to prevent domestic violence, and a project we have currently going on is a toolkit we've put together for faith communities in Whatcom County, and this is a resource that we have spent quite a bit of time researching and putting together. It includes sample sermons, it includes interpretations of various religious texts that would be anti-abuse and supportive of healthy relationships and healthy conflict and communication. It includes books and videos and training resources for people who are leading groups with women, men, and youth, and it includes activities for working with youth and children about healthy relationships. And it just includes a lot of information about how to work with a victim when they come forward, how to work with someone who's abusive, and how to work with children who are witnessing domestic violence. And so the real idea is to have something that's both reactive, so faith communities that are witnessing domestic violence or have relationships including that have domestic violence, they can respond in a best practice way, but also has information that's proactive, so they can do prevention work in those communities with families. And one of the reasons we chose faith communities is we really wanted to work with just the places where the general public go, people who aren't necessarily coming forward to law enforcement or who may not be criminal domestic violence all the time. A lot of it is emotional or financial that's not criminal. So we have piloted this toolkit this spring in 2 faith communities, Christ Lutheran Ferndale and Christ the King Bellingham. And they're finishing up their surveys and evaluations this month, and then we'll do some updates to the faith community toolkit, and then we'll be launching it county-wide in a more thorough way in the fall. So we're really looking forward to getting this resource out there more systemically for multiple faith communities. One of our other strategic goals is to promote best practices in our community response, and right now we're focusing on high-risk and high-lethality domestic violence. We're focusing our resources on those domestic violence incidents that are most likely to end in really serious assault or homicide. And one activity that we're doing under this goal is the Domestic Violence High Risk Team. And this team we have been working a while on forming. We started it officially started in November 2014. So it's been going about a year and a half. And its goal is to monitor the highest risk offenders, so the perpetrators who are most likely to commit high lethality or serious assaults against their partners. Since our inception, we've monitored 29 different offenders who the team members have been either recommended to the team or team members have identified them through, generally through law enforcement, sometimes through domestic violence sexual assault services, sometimes through prosecutors, sometimes through child protection or schools. So we're identifying our highest risk offenders, gathering as much information about them as we can from our various partners, and then putting in place monitoring plans for how to monitor them, increase some of our efforts to whether that's probation or ask for increased bail or jail time or increased work with the survivor, but to focus on how to prevent a homicide or serious assault in that situation. So as I said, we've had 29 offenders so far, and now that we're a year and a half in, we're starting to collect data to measure what are we doing differently with these offenders than other offenders, and how are those outcomes making a difference in their recidivism. And we haven't had any homicides with anyone on the team, but that is not the only measure because homicide is so rare. We want to measure some other outcomes as well. Then one of our other goals is to increase capacity in our community to address domestic violence as it impacts children and youth. So this is, we've been doing work for about 4 years with the Ferndale School District under our pilot project with their middle and high schools. And that grant will be rolling into in the fall, doing work with the Mount Baker Blaine and Ferndale School Districts K through 12. So we'll be able to serve elementary students as well and their families. So that will be rolling out in the fall. We'll be increasing our reach. And one project, I spoke about this when we were planning it last year, and there's a lot of interest on this council, so I wanted to kind of give an update on it. So one project that we did related to that grant the past year was in September. We had a youth summit, and we, the Ferndale youth helped us plan the summit and promote it and invited their friends from other communities. We had 135 students, middle and high school students, attend that summit. They represented 11 different schools, and there were 22 adult advisors there with them. So each team of youth came with an adult advisor. And at that day, we had some speakers who spoke about how to be an activist. Then we had speakers that talked about healthy relationships, consent, gender roles, healthy conflict resolution. So youth participate in all these different workshops. And then at the end of the day, they got back in their teams and worked with their advisors and created action plans for something they wanted to change in their school within that school year. And then we actually held a follow-up event in May. We held a creative coffee house, and many of the youth got back together to kind of check in about what they had tried in their schools, what had worked and what didn't work, and then to talk about kind of keeping in touch. And in the fall, we will be working again with those teams to try to get them motivated back within their schools. Then our final goal is we are expanding our mission to include sexual violence that occurs outside of intimate partner relationships. So there's a lot of sexual assault and sexual abuse within domestic violence, and we're looking at including in our work related to sexual assault, such as date rape, acquaintance rape, the stranger rape that occasionally happens, not as common as acquaintance or date rape. So we have submitted a grant to the Department of Justice to do a community safety assessment of the response to sexual assault, which would allow us to get a really clear look at our strengths and gaps related to sexual assault in our community, see where the needs are, see if there is a role for us to be doing that macro level systems work. And then if we were to consider an expansion of our mission, that actually is not the DV Commission's decision, that's your all decision. So we would bring back the results of the assessment. We would let you know what our recommendation is and leave that up to you all, because it would require change in our founding ordinance and for you all to decide that that was something you wanted us to be doing in this community. So that is to be determined. We'll hear about the grant at the end of September, and then based on whether we receive or not receive it, we'll determine our next steps. So, any questions or comments for me, or did I speak slowly enough to keep up mostly?
Thank you, Susan. Council members, any questions? No? No? Woohoo! Thank you so much, Susan, for the work you do in our community. We know this makes a significant difference, so thank you so much.
Great. Well, thank you for your support in every way you provide it.
Okay. So our first agenda item that we switched to number 2 is still not here, so maybe we'll go to number 3 if we could, and that is the ordinance establishing an independent salary commission to review and set the salaries for the elected officials of the City of Bellingham. And I believe Peter Rufato, our city attorney, is going to...
Yeah. Thank you. So this is in follow-up to the June 20th discussion of a draft ordinance. As directed by council, the ordinance was redrafted to indicate that there would be a 7-member board and that they would, the board would be created and fulfill its duties every 4 years. So just to go over the highlights of the ordinance, the Salary Commission, this independent Salary Commission, would be filled and members appointed in accordance with the provisions of the ordinance every 4 years commencing in 2017. It would be a 7-member board. The board or the commission would serve a 180-day term, and then there could be extensions, a 60-day extension if the commission deemed it necessary to complete its duties, and a further extension if council passed a resolution to that effect. And the essence of the commission would be they would review and fix the salaries and, if appropriate, annual adjustments to salaries of all elected officials of the City of Bellingham. Any change in salary would be filed by the commission with the city finance director and would become effective and incorporated into the city budget for the following calendar year without further action of the city council or salary commission. And one important provision is that the action of fixing the salary or setting the salary by the commission would supersede any other provisions of state statute or city ordinances related to the city budget or the fixing of salaries. And for that reason, there is a second section. In addition to establishing this commission, the ordinance would amend certain provisions related to salaries. Basically, for each of the elected offices, a note that the action of the commission would supersede anything in city code related to salaries of elected officials. And I'll leave it at that. If there are any questions, I can attempt to answer those.
Council members. Councilmember Barker, then Murphy.
So I thought a lot about this since it came to us, and a lot about our discussions on fiscal responsibility and the things that we're looking at, the EMS levy, parks going on. And I don't feel comfortable taking on the consideration of this ordinance. I'd really prefer to at least wait till January, where we have a better idea of what went through and where we're going to be. We're trying everything we can to break down that and to fill that general budget gap. And this is just one more thing that's going to pile on top, and I imagine we're going to have a lot of others. So I'd like to make a motion to consider or to postpone the consideration of the ordinance until January 2017, when we have more information of the voter response to the levy and the status of the general budget.
Does the administration or staff want to say anything on that, or? No? Okay. All right, so a motion did not get a second. Peter Raffato?
So the mayor reminded me that among the various provisions, there are various provisions that will be superseded by any action taken by the commission. Just to be thorough here, it includes a specific salary per year under the judicial salary. It includes the manner of setting the city council salary, which also includes the 3% annual increase. So that would be superseded, as well as those provisions related to the mayor's salary, which are essentially set in accordance in relation to E-team and department heads. And so I just wanted to be thorough in terms of showing what would be superseded by any action taken by the commission.
Right. And again, this is not just about the elected officials that are sitting in this room. This is also about our judiciary, and we have to keep that in mind. Councilmember Borneman, you had your hand up?
Yeah, are we looking for approval to move? If so, I would move approval of the ordinance.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion in front of us to approve the ordinance establishing an independent salary commission to review and set the salaries for the elected officials of the city of Bellingham. All those in favor, please, oh wait, did you want to wait till after the vote, Mayor Kelly, or? Well, usually discussion. I'm going to ask for the, yeah, okay.
So no, I don't. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay.
I mean, when there is a motion, then don't we have the discussion?
We have discussion, yes.
Yes, okay. Because I think I've been thinking about this too. And for me, besides the level of service discussion that April mentioned, there is policy in this document that deals with how we set people's salaries overall. And I think that I just wanted to highlight to the members, the council members, that it takes away the ability for the council to set the policy for how you want the salaries to be determined. So if you decided you didn't want the mayor's salary to be set at a certain level so that we don't have compression, and I'm speaking of me, not me, but as the mayor's salary, you would not have the opportunity to do that. If there's, I mean, it isn't just a should we make more money, and I say we because I'm an elected official. Should we make less money? That's, you know, it can be decided either way, which is perfectly fine and should be. That's why you have a commission. But the only issue that I wanted to bring up is it does take away your ability to also set policy, because the salary commission would supersede any policy that is in our charter now, or any policy that you might think would be important later. A policy that I've informally set, because of the compression we were having with our executive team and our department heads, was that as we negotiate the contracts, that our department heads would get the same increase as we negotiate for our unions, which has worked out very well because it's kind of kept everybody from changing or compressing the salaries. And so it isn't a big deal. Well, I think it is kind of a big deal. I just want to make sure that you were aware of that before you voted, because I think it's a major step to decide that the council is not in charge of not the rate, but the policy. And if it wasn't for that, I would probably maybe be making a different point to you. But I think the policy, taking the policy away from the council, is something that I just want you to be aware of.
Councilmember Borneman.
Not being in charge of the policy, we're just relating to the policy as it relates to the electeds. Is that correct? Yeah.
But it affects more than the electeds, because there's informal policies that have affected others too.
Right, but the only ones that are affected by this action for us is how we set policy as it relates to electeds.
Well, you don't get to set policy.
It's not on the.
Well, let's just say right now in there, I'm trying to maintain our ability to hire the brightest and the best department heads and executive team based on the fact that there's an informal policy that says this is the way we set the rates, so we don't give no department head raises when we give raises for our employees, and we don't give big department head raises when the employees don't get any. So I said that should be equitable, so that we can maintain some stepping that doesn't get to compression.
Right.
So if in fact a salary commission decided to do something different, that would take away some ability for that informal policy making, or the policy making that's in our charter.
How would the policy? Oh, I'm sorry.
Councilmember Parker.
That doesn't make any sense.
So to the point, we've had or at least I've had some conversations trying to understand these ideas of our expenses outpacing our revenues. And I think when we get into things like right now, we have a 3% all the time. And if this group decides we should still continue to have that plus a bump, so how do we have our human resources department go and talk with our unions and say, well, we'd like you to be here, but our council just had however many % raise, as well as they're still going to continue whatever this commission decides to give us. So I think it just makes things really difficult when we get there. And I'm so new at this, I don't know other opportunities or options, much like a union would have to do for us to get together and figure it out. But I just fear that once we give this away, it's just going to really tie our hands when we go back to the table.
Keep in mind that we are encouraged to provide information to help the commission make the decision on what we believe. So we can be part of this conversation. We are not being excluded from the conversation. Councilmember Portman.
Yeah, I need to go back to what you were saying, Mayor, because I'm confused by it.
I don't mean to confuse you.
Well,
I really don't.
none of the department heads are elected officials. None of the people working under them are elected officials, so would not be covered by
No, they
this.
wouldn't.
So we can set, or you can set, we can approve, policy as it relates to salaries on department heads and all other staff, other than for you, us, the few electeds. Is that correct?
I was very clumsily trying to say that the way that our charter is now, which is a policy that's been set by council, is that there are certain standards like no one is supposed to make more money than the mayor. And I have used that policy to try to equalize people's salary that was not getting raises some other times because of budget constraints. And so I'm just saying that they could affect each other. Terry, you're absolutely right. They're not affected by what you're saying now, but the ability to give information, Pinky, is absolutely accurate. You can give your opinion. You can say what you think you'd like it to be. But the truth is, my experience with salary commissions is they're supposed to be really independent, and they're not really supposed to be listening to the elected officials whose salary they're discussing that much. I mean, that's why you have a salary commission, because you want it one step removed from the elected officials that would be either benefiting or not benefiting from the decisions that the salary commission made. So I wouldn't want to give you the impression that that's more influential than really it should be.
Yeah, like I mentioned last time, we did this ourselves back in the late 90s, and it wasn't very well done. It doesn't look right when we can sit here and incrementally raise our own salaries. There's salary commissions all over the country. There's salary commissions at the legislature, salary commissions in the county. So it's a nonpartisan, independent group. So I think that's the best way to go.
Councilmember Hamel.
To me, it's a fairness and equity issue as it relates to kind of what Jean just said, that you take the ownership out of the hands of the people that would benefit or not benefit and put it in an independent commission. And so that's why I'm supporting this.
Anyone else? I realize this is going to be a little bit challenging, but I too don't want to be the person responsible for deciding what my salary is going to be, because I'm sure nobody would be comfortable with that. So again, we have a motion in front of us for an ordinance establishing an independent salary commission to review and set the salaries for the elected officials of the city of Bellingham. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries 5-1. Okay, so now we're going to jet back on the agenda, and we're going to go to agenda item number 1, and I'm going to introduce our Washington State Representative Jeff Morris, who represents the 40th District. Please join us, Jeff, and do you need anything for your presentation?
Sorry, I didn't hear that last bit.
No. Do you need anything for your presentation, or is it just verbal? Are you
No, I'm just
okay?
going to try to do my best to dazzle you without a PowerPoint.
All
microphone?
right, that is terrific.
Is the
Thank you
microphone
for
on
joining
down
us.
there? There you go.
Thank you. For the record, Jeff Morris, representative of the 40th Legislative District, Position 2. My regrets that Chris Litton couldn't join me here today. I think we were trying to coordinate appearing together, but once we're out of session and into the wind, lining up the calendars is often difficult with all of our interim projects and work and so forth. So I extend regrets from her for not being here with me today. I'm going to do a quick wrap-up of the legislative session. Happy to answer any questions you might have. I know several of you came down and visited during the session. I appreciate that elected official to elected official contact, and it definitely makes it easier to have an exchange of ideas and clarify things that the city of Bellingham is looking for from the state when you do come down. So I just wanted you to know I appreciate that when you do make the effort. I know the drive well, and I know it's not easy to make that time commitment to go back and forth. I'm going to touch really just on subjects that you shared with me as part of your legislative agenda for the city. and touch on those items. I know there were some other ones you coordinated with the port and the county as well. I'd be happy to spend more time on those. But the top 3 or 4 issues that you approached us on, two of them were energy related, which is my area of expertise, and I'd be happy to talk for hours if you want on it, but I'll just cover what happened. The first, you were looking for some tax credits for multifamily housing that invest in energy efficiency, and that's a huge issue I'm very personally passionate about. It's an area that is probably one of the least developed in our state for being a very progressive state in the energy efficiency area, just because often the person that owns the building, and this goes for commercial buildings as well, that doesn't benefit from those investments in energy efficiency. Usually the people that rent the apartment or the office space are the ones that benefit from those investments, not the person that actually owns the building. So it's one where tax credits can be a good tool. There wasn't a big appetite for tax credits with the McCleary decision and some of the other budget demands. I can say there was a big priority not only to try to meet as much of the McCleary obligation to K through 12 education, but also to buy back as much mental health safety net as we could possible, because we pushed a lot of the mental health needs into the criminal justice system, and that's the most costly way to deal with that problem. Bellingham's been at the forefront of trying to deal with it in more proactive ways with community-based support. And we're trying to buy some of those services back as far as the evaluations and diverting people out of criminal justice to places that they actually can get help. So there were not a lot of tax credits. The one for energy efficiency was one that didn't get in the final supplemental budget that we did. There's something that I'm looking at at a meeting I was at in the last couple of months. There's a new tool that's kind of coming to the marketplace in the finance sector, which is looking at the cost of tenants, being a tenant, whether it's for a commercial building or a renter. And looking at the risk involved with not being able to make either your rent payment, no matter what type of housing it is, and the risk to the people that actually write the loans for buildings like that. And there's a tool coming out of Texas that is actually looking at a way to amortize those investments in energy efficiency by giving a lower interest rate, because there's less risk, because people can afford to stay in the dwelling during those first 7 years. And that's something we're going to keep looking at to see if we can't do some risk sharing with the financial sector to encourage those types of loan devices, because that way the building owner, whether it be for multifamily housing or commercial, gets the benefit of making those investments in the property. So we're looking at other creative ways, because I don't see the financial situation with a big appetite for more tax credits, no matter how much merit there might be to the outcome from those. There's just so many demands on the spending side to meet court decision mandates that there's almost going to be a lot of competition outside of whether that's a good idea or not. So, Madam Chair, do you want me to stop after each topic and take questions, or just kind of finish and...
Please proceed, and then we'll take questions at the end.
I'll cover just the other 2 or 3 really quickly. The other thing that you've spent some time talking to me about is something I spent a lot of time on the last 3 years, which was the solar production tax credit. And we had an unprecedented bipartisan vote on the legislation we worked on. I think we had 72 out of 98 votes, which I never thought that was possible in the House, to get that large of a bipartisan vote. I have troubles getting, 58 votes sometimes to make one wasteful light bulb illegal in the state of Washington. So I think it reflected all the time we put in with all the stakeholders and with both parties. Unfortunately, the Senate didn't have the same sense of enlightenment we had in the House. And even though I think if there was a floor vote to reauthorize and reprogram the production tax credit going forward, we never got a floor vote in the Senate. I think if we would have had a floor vote, it would have passed from our kind of informal vote count. And I'm not going to speak to the motives of why that did or didn't happen in the Senate, but I would just say it wasn't a priority for them to take up and have a floor vote on it in the end. In reprogramming the money, I'll tell you, just touch on the issues, is that right now we're grossly overpaying for the existing solar incentive program that we have. When we started that policy, our hope was to have a 10-year payback for the capital investment you as a citizen might make into a PV solar system. Right now, because the cost of panels have dropped so much, the payback period is roughly 3.5 to 4 years for a residential system and 2 years for a community solar system. So if you're listening to this, my advice, if you're looking to buy one of those, the time is now, because the payback period is very quick. There was a lot of people, when interest rates were very low and the stock market was not doing well, that looked at our incentive program as being a higher rate of return for an investment than some of those other traditional investments go. But we wanted to reprogram that money because, again, we wanted to go back to where our goal was, is to have this be a tool to let more, not just the people who can afford to pay cash to be energy independent and have a cleaner source of energy, but to have tools in the toolbox that make it so more everyday people can get in and have meet those same outcomes of being energy independent and have a cleaner source of electricity. The old program today is probably going to touch about 38 megawatts of power. The way the bill passed the House, it would have touched about 120 megawatts of PV systems, so you can see the much greater number of systems we would have touched for that program by doing an adjustment and basically improving it, in my opinion. So it didn't pass the Senate. We're going to come back with that since we had such a strong bipartisan vote, and maybe we can reprogram it the next session. But the window is kind of closing for local installers and businesses like iTech. Our hope was that we could give them enough of enough runway to do some business planning around other than what's going to happen today, which is grossly overpaying and then the program abruptly ending. So our hope is we're going to come back and address that in 2017. Just touching on a couple of other issues. I know we've talked a lot about transportation issues. We worked with both the city and the county on a bunch of projects for the 40th and 42nd District in the new revenue package we passed last year. The only change that happened in this last session is there was some money that was reprogrammed from there was an overpass for the Guide Meridian, and there was $3 million that was taken from that and put into a Thornton Road overpass. That was a different project, and that request came from the 42nd District, and I'd let them speak as to what the merits of that were. But that was the only change that happened from the 2015 to the 2016 budget. And then I'm going to touch just for a second on MOTCA money. That's been a huge issue here for not only the city but the port and the county as well. The monies that have been funding the cleanup around Bellingham Bay largely were untouched. There was a lot of jockeying going on over some of the larger funding in that kind of general pool of money. There was some reduction in money for stormwater grants, which I know are another important issue, but MOTCA was not, there was no money taken away from the MOTCA remedial accounts. There was money diverted from stormwater and another program I'm forgetting off the top of my head that was reduced. That probably had a big environmental impact, but again, MOTCA was the one we were the most concerned about here because there's been such a benefit not only for Bellingham but for Anacortes as well in some of the cleanup sites that have been funded or are in the queue. So those are the main issues we've talked about the last 2 or 3 years. I'm happy to spend any more time that you want to talk on any particular subjects, but I think I'll just wrap up with that and see where you want to take the conversation.
Thank you, Representative Morris. Council, questions? Councilmember Hamel.
Thank you for coming and presenting today. I really appreciate your time. Local voters here in Bellingham passed a housing levy in 2012 to the tune of $21 million to support the production of affordable housing, preservation, and such. I'm just wondering, is there a way to leverage that funding with the State Housing Trust Fund?
Yeah, we've always been I'll just say this, is that at least from my perspective from the House, we've always been kind of the high watermark in funding for the Housing Trust Fund. One of the things that's changed in the last year here, and I don't know if it's because of that levy passing, which I think was a great investment in the community, but a lot of our money's been focused on subsidized rental housing, and there's been I've had more local contact from here trying to get us to put more money into ownership, a potential ownership of housing as opposed to just subsidized rental housing. And, you know, there's a gap, I would say, at least in my perception, between moving out of rental housing, period, and actually having affordable home ownership. And I think you're starting to see us push more money in that area, and that might be one that more partnerships like you're talking about, if the levy funds can be used for that, might be one where there may be more upside. The other thing we're looking at, and I think you'll see, we did a pilot program for school funding this year, but we're doing a big push for, it's called compressed laminated timber construction, because it checks off a lot of good policy boxes for us. It lets us use unusable timber from state forest lands. And if you don't know what CLT is, this is all wood construction where, unlike a stick and frame building, you have entire walls that are built out of multiple layers of timber. And like in Portland, there's like 21-story buildings made out of this, completely out of wood. More strong, more durable, better carbon sequestration, locally sourced, more economic multiplier. And what's kind of neat, I don't want to use the term Lego because that makes it sound cheap. It's really nice housing. And it can, we saw a film or video where like a 6-story building was put up in basically 16 hours of work. And for homelessness problems and for buildings that are really quality, but if you need to move them because you're trying to address maybe some migration in population, you can actually move them as quickly as you can assemble them. And so as far as a lot of housing programs, we think there's a lot of upside there. So I think you're going to see some pilot projects with CLT as being a focus as well.
Thank you.
Representative Morris, could you give us a little update on McCleary?
Yeah, and I would certainly defer to Representative Litton as being the expert, because she's, you know, on the 6-person negotiating team for that. But the short version, because people hear the name McCleary all the time, and I find that people sometimes don't understand the process of how we get there, or they hear the legislature's in contempt. There was a lawsuit from the school districts against the state that we weren't adequately funding a modern-day definition of basic education. We adopted a modern-day version of basic education, which we hadn't updated since the 70s. The lawsuit was filed a little bit before we did that. The court came in and said, basically, and I'm not an attorney, so I'm just telling you my impression of stuff here. We like the definition you adopted. We had a funding ramp up to 2017-18 to fund that new definition of basic education. What's new in that, roughly, is that, well, a lot of people think basic computer skills should be part of basic education today, and access to computer equipment shouldn't be part of local levies, that should be part of a definition of basic education. So that's why we redid that definition. So we have a schedule to fund up to that 2018 definition, which was roughly about $3 billion on top of what we're doing now. When you hear that we're in contempt, the last session they looked at what we funded and said, we don't think you're on that, that projection to meet the 2018 goal. And so that was part of what we tried to come back and put more money on the table in the supplemental budget in order to get back on that projected timeline. Even though we might be back, and again, arguably on course with meeting that 2018 goal, we still have another big chunk we have to fund coming up in this next 2017 biennium, which arguably will be the hardest piece because it's the largest investment. My perspective is that even though we've had a lot of economic growth and we have a lot of extra revenue, it's not going to meet that obligation. We're not going to grow our way to fund that definition that we've adopted that needs to be funded by 2018.
Council members? One additional, maybe you could tell us what do you think some of the big items are going to be for the next session?
Well, right now it's hard to say what the majorities are going to look like, and again, we're going through one of the large national election cycles, and so that aside, we talked about McCleary already. I think that there's going to be continued effort to fund some of the environmental cleanup that we've moved some money around, and I hate to use the term rob funds. You hear the term sweeping, which are all euphemisms for there was money set aside to do this, and it was taken and we did something else with it, like fund McCleary. But obviously, those projects impact neighborhoods and communities, so I think you're going to see a big push to get it and both mental health services bought back. I can't emphasize enough. Our hands are tied and obligated by law and the Constitution for funding basic education and a lot of other things that are obligated because of either strings that came from federal money. So unfortunately, the two areas of the budget during the Great Recession that took the biggest hit was higher education, took a 40% plus hit. That was made up for by higher tuition. In some circumstances, we tried to backfill with more financial aid to make up a little bit for that. But really the biggest hit came from social services, and particularly the mental health area. And I think no matter where I go, you talk to sheriffs, you talk to people that run jails, you talk to people at hospitals and emergency care centers, and all that shortchanging our safety net in that area is pushing people to where they're not getting the help they need, and it's costing us more as taxpayers in the long run. Unfortunately, we do a 2 and a kind of a 4-year budget cycle. We never look at the life cycle cost of some of these decisions, and I think if we did, we'd get a lot better outcome for taxpayers. But I think backfilling some of the mental health service cuts is going to be an equally high priority for no matter how the elections turn out.
Mayor Kelly.
When you're all done.
Councilmember
Go with it.
Barker, Hamel, then Boardman.
So, thank you. It was my first experience going down to Olympia, being pretty new, and I had decided to go like 2 days before. And nearly every single representative we had in the 42nd and the 40th took time, and you were one of them, and made it extremely comfortable. And you guys were being lobbied left and right, and things were just moving so fast. So I really appreciated you taking the time out to explain some things to me and for us to talk a little bit. So thank you for making yourself accessible.
Yep. Thanks for coming down. And people are often overwhelmed by the pace we have, and if I can just make a comment on it. I think it's something that as a I think of myself as a public servant, but I'm not sure that we're getting from a civics point of view. Since I've been in office, we've gone from the 17th to the 13th largest state. And we're fitting more and more content in the same amount of time we met way back in the 70s. 79, I think, we went to a 60-day short session. And I'm not saying we need to have a full-time legislature. I just wish sometimes we had a 2-week timeout in the middle of session to let staff catch up. Because what happens now is that we're supposed to have equal branches of government, we all, elections happen. We don't always have a great executive branch like you have here in Bellingham going on.
Thank you for that.
But, when we don't have time to actually write better laws, we leave the writing of the definitions up to the agencies through rulemaking, and we don't do it as a matter of law. And more and more of our work becomes, we never thought you would interpret this definition that way. And I can go back to one I did like 10 years ago where we didn't have time to actually figure out what a definition of carbon capture and sequestration would be, because no one had ever written a law before in that area. And so we left it up to our environmental agency. Well, they said it was 98% containment for 1,000 years. Now, for a state that wasn't quite 100 years old at the time, that was an ambitious paper trail. But it basically made it so that no one would make an investment because there's no fiduciary logic to take that type of risk if you're a private company trying something for the first time. So we wouldn't have done it that way, but that's an example. We don't have time. We pass the buck, and sometimes they don't do it the same way. But members are having health issues. Staff have health issues. We're fitting in a tremendous amount of work in a very, very short time.
Thank you. I just wanted to acknowledge the comments you made about mental health provision. We're facing a crisis here in Whatcom County, and I'm sure we're not the only ones here. Mayor Kelly and I sit on a task force that addresses these issues. Our local police chief told me that about 60% of the calls that they receive have a mental health component to them. So it's not. There's a lot of factors, moving parts with that, right? So we have officers who have to make very sudden decisions. We have great officers here that choose not to use the lethal force in these circumstances. I'm just afraid that at some point there might be a situation where that's not the case. Since 2012, we've had an exodus of service providers here for both mental health illness treatment and also substance use disorder. And what we're seeing is the closure of large facilities like Pioneer Center North in Skagit, 141 beds going away. It's a regional facility. And what's coming in is a 144-bed facility in Smoky Point, which is a private hospital, which is not going to replace those beds that are going away. Locally here, we're putting together a proposal for 2 16-bed co-located facilities, one for mental health, one for substance use, 32 beds. So we really, it's frustrating. I feel like we're on a mission impossible when it comes to trying to come up with resources for both our law enforcement community and also folks that need the help. They're just, the capacity is not there. And I just want to express that concern, and I'm hopeful that because you're aware of the situation here, that you'll be advocating for us in Olympia.
Well, thanks. I appreciate your perspective on that. And I'll just say this, that for my caucus at least, this was one of our top 3 priorities the last 2 sessions. It became a major sticking point around, we actually last year did seemingly, I thought it was 5, it was 4 special sessions, but part of the argument is that we wanted to actually look at some of our revenue to actually buy more of the mental health services back, and felt that was a responsible thing to do. I'm even more troubled. I'm just going to say, if you look at what's going on for juvenile bed access for mental health services, it's really almost a crime. What's going on there, and it's even worse than some of the adult mental health services. And it's not just big things like beds, too. I just want to, there's a lot of people at the Department of Social and Health Services that their job is to actually go out and do med checks to make sure people are taking medicine that's going to help them stay mentally healthy. And if their ratio got up to 165 cases plus per person, now, and a lot of times if you're off your meds for, a couple days, you start seeing some impacts. When you cut to an area where people just have no chance of success, and a simple amount of safety net support to get people so they don't have to have med checks any longer. I just want to say that that's an example of across the board where mental health care took hits everywhere. Thank you.
Councilmember Borneman.
Yeah, no questions right now. I just want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come up and talk to us, take the questions. It's important to hear about the session and things, and so I just wanted to make sure we thanked you for coming up. It's always good to see you.
Thanks for inviting me.
Anyone else?
Me.
Oh, yes, sorry, Mayor Kelly.
And I'm not necessarily asking a question, but I was looking at Dan when you were talking about the housing dollars going more into home ownership, and we certainly wouldn't want to lose our capacity for supported rentals, because that's an area where we see that you get, especially if we're looking at facilities, you get that efficiency in making sure people get their meds and get their wraparound services. And also, we're a housing first community, and so we'd like to see people in housing, and we'd like to see people be able to buy houses too. But I just wanted to raise that issue in that we're really covetous of the money that we can get someone sheltered. So I'm speaking for myself, but I think there's some people up there that might agree with me. Terry's nodding and said yes. And I want to just say for me, because I'm in contact with Jeff a lot, our 40th District representatives are very aware of our legislative agenda, very responsive when we need anything. And I would just encourage all of you to bother Jeff during the interim, because those real quick trips to Olympia are very difficult to actually, it's nice to go and it's nice to see and it's nice to alert, but that's kind of why we pay our lobbyists. So the interim is a time when I'd like to bother him, and you should bother him too.
Yeah, I would just respond, like you being part-time in your service, we sometimes get a little bit reactive in our scheduling. So, if we don't know that there's an important meeting we should be at with you, that's the reason we're not there. So if you think we should be somewhere, I think you can ask any of the 3 of us, and we'll make every effort for one of us to be there. And then we usually talk to each other quite often. It's like, Chris couldn't be here today. I'll talk to her about how the meeting went and so forth, and we tend to collaborate quite a bit. So if you think we should be somewhere, please tell us we should be somewhere, and I know that one of us will always try to make it between the three of us.
Thank you very much, Representative Morris. We really appreciate your time, and thank you for your service.
Yep, thank you as well. Thanks.
Okay, so we are going to move to item number 4 of item number 9. So the next item in front of us is the adoption of the International Fire Code for the 2015 edition. Effective July 1st, 2016, the State Fire Code has changed from the International Fire Code 2012 edition to the 2015 edition. And the BMC, this ordinance updates the BMC to include the newest fire code and adds local amendments. And I'm going to turn it over to Bill Hewitt, our Assistant Fire Chief.
Good afternoon, Bill Hewitt, Fire Department. And
Is your mic on, Bill?
I believe.
Is the little button
How about
glowing?
now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Sorry.
Sorry.
So, Bill Hewitt with the Fire Department. And before we get started on the ordinance, real quick, I just wanted to introduce Ron Richard. Ron Richard is our new Division Chief of the Life Safety Division, also known as the Fire Marshal. Ron was selected. He's been a 15-plus year member of the Bellingham Fire Department, most recently serving as a fire captain out at Station 4. And after we went through an exhaustive internal and external search, Ron was chosen to take that position here. Started on June 1st. So just wanted a chance to introduce him to the council. And next time we do the adoption, he'll be the one in front of you doing all the talking.
Welcome.
So. This is, the ordinance here is an ordinance we update every 3 years. Our fire code here in the city of Bellingham is based on a model code known as the International Fire Code. Every 3 years they update the addition of the code. With that, we review it and update our local amendments to adopt the newest version of the code. This year, as part of the process, we engaged folks from our life safety division who have to go out and enforce it. We went through it and kind of looked at what some of our enforcement issues were on it. We engaged our operations division, some of the things that after we build the building, that issues that they see when they're out there responding. And then we spent, I think, 3 or I was looking back for our BIA representatives there, but we spent 3 or 4 sessions with the building industry of Whatcom County as well, kind of walking through and looking at some of the challenges and mainly focus on inconsistencies in the code that make construction a little more predictable here in Bellingham. So that was the process that we went through to get to this adoption or this particular version. In your packet, there was a staff memo that highlights some of the significant changes there. I won't reread that to you here this afternoon, but if you do have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Councilmember Murphy.
I would just like to move that we adopt the International Fire Code 2015 edition.
Second.
Do we have any discussion? We have a motion in front of us. Any discussion? No? Okay.
I just want to thank you for your work and reaching out to some other stakeholders. And I think, did you just recently get pinned? Were you part of that group? Is that why your badge is so shiny?
Yes,
Okay,
just a couple nights ago.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank
That
you.
was a pleasure to watch.
Yes, thank you very much for collaborating with our community on process improvement. That is always welcome. Okay, we have a motion. Oh, did I miss anybody? No? Okay, we have a motion in front of us for the adoption of the International Fire Code 2015 edition. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Nice to meet you, Ron. We'll see you again. I also wanted to thank you for your contribution to the Pride Parade yesterday. It was wonderful to have the firefighters there. Thank you so much. Okay, we are on to item number 5. authorizing the mayor to enter an interlocal agreement with Whatcom County for EDI grant funding to construct waterfront district arterial streets. In February of 2016, City Council passed a resolution supporting EDI grant funding, and I'm going to turn it over to Ted Carlson, our Public Works Director.
Thank you, Ted Carlson, Public Works. I think that's a pretty good summary. Council has seen this item before. The interlocal in front of the council is for the $1.1 million. It is a grant. There is no loan like we've had in the past with EDI. So this is a grant towards Laurel Granary, the first arterial for the waterfront, and it will be a welcome funding for that project, which is now fully funded. So other than that, if you have any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Councilmember Hamel.
Thank you. On page 149 of the packet, or page 1 of the Economic Development Investment Program Interlocal Grant Agreement, item B, there's a reference to an attachment C, which is what I would regard as the total project budget, and it's probably in the packet. I may have just overlooked it, but I don't see it in the packet.
Looks like that might have been an oversight. So the total project budget is the $10.4 million for the total cost of Laurel Granary, and it's made up of this EDI funding along with the $6.7 million from the federal grant. That was a high priority project federal grant from 2006. There's some real estate excise tax money and some street fund money that make up the balance of the $10.4 million.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Murphy, then Barker.
I just move that we authorize the mayor to enter into an interlocal agreement with Whatcom County for economic development investment grant funding to construct waterfront district arterial streets.
Councilmembers, any discussion? Councilmember Barker.
So with this grant, how much money do we have left to contribute out of that 10.4 million? Where are we at now?
So with the grant, the 1.1 million EDI added to the 6.7, so $7.8 million in grant.
Okay.
So the balance is local funding of the 10.4.
Oh, we still have all the 10.4 to come up with?
It's funded, it's fully funded, it's already in the budget, so it's a fully funded project that we anticipate going out to bid right after the first of the year, January of 2017.
Council members, any additional question?
Did I answer your question?
I think I didn't ask it right. Do we have all the money to pay for that full road now?
We do, fully
funded project. And so now we're just down to waterfront park money? Is that pretty much?
The first phase, yeah, and we're going to have, that's going to be an agenda item later, but Laurel Granary is fully funded.
Wonderful. Thank you.
We love the words fully funded. Councilmember Hamel.
Was there a second?
Yeah.
Yes, two of them. Council members, any other discussion? Okay, motion in front of us again to enter the interlocal agreement with the EDI grant funding to construct waterfront district arterial streets. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Thank you very much, Ted. Okay, we are moving on to item number 6. We are to approve and authorize the mayor to enter into interlocal agreement between the City of Bellingham and Whatcom County to finance the 2016 Aquatic Invasive Species Boat Inspection Program. Currently, the attachment City of Bellingham and Whatcom County allows cost sharing not to exceed $95,000 of boat inspection and related AIS services during the 2016 season. And I'm going to turn this over to Ted Carlson, again, our Public Works Director.
Earlier this year, the council authorized the mayor to enter into a similar interlocal agreement with the Lake Whatcom Water and Sewer District. This is for funding the aquatic invasive species inspection program that's managed by the city but provided to the partners of the Lake Whatcom Management Program. This interlocal agreement is simply to allow for the cost county to pay the city for services that will be provided this year. So the interlocal agreement covers the county's portion of the cost of the services for 2016, up to $95,000, which is the same amount that the city of Bellingham contributes to the program. $50,000 comes from Lake Whatcom Water and Sewer District, and the balance of the cost of the program is funded by the permits paid for by the boaters. When we brought this issue to the council earlier this year, we certainly understand that the council would like to have further discussions about cost recovery. We intend to do that, in fact, at the next joint policy board meeting next Monday. This will be a topic of discussion for the members of that group. We're also reaching out to council members to have further discussions about what we will bring back later this year in terms of how do we increase the cost recovery, percent cost recovery from the program. This interlocal agreement is simply to allow the county to pay us for services that we will be providing this year. So we would recommend that the council authorize the mayor to enter into this interlocal agreement.
Councilmember Knutson, then Barker.
I'd like to move approval.
Second.
Did you, Councilmember Barker, did you have, or were you just going to make a motion? Okay, all right, Councilmember Hamel.
Just a question as to procedure. Wondering why this didn't land in the Lake Whatcom Committee versus the Committee of the Whole.
I don't set the committee, so I don't know.
I don't know the answer, but I'll take responsibility, and I'll say that it's probably because we've had so many discussions about AIS, et cetera, that we thought maybe it should be deferred to Committee of the Whole. I'm thinking that's what happened our last discussion. This was a couple months ago, but I believe that's probably why it went to Committee of the Whole.
Okay, thank you.
There's always a line, you know, where it goes, and yeah, that's a good explanation.
Okay, so, oh yes, we did make a motion, did we? I'm like, oh, thank you very much. Getting us back on track. We have a motion to approve and authorize the mayor to enter the interlocal agreement between the city and the county to finance the 2016 AIS boat inspection program. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
Motion, okay, one opposed. Motion carries 5-1. All right. So we're going to move on to item number 7 of 9. Woo, moving right through. All right. So next we are going to have a presentation. This is a Waterfront District Implementation Status Report. Staff will provide an update on the projects that the City of Bellingham is leading in the Waterfront District, including Granary Ave and Laurel Street and Whatcom Waterway Park. And staff will provide an overview of Harcourt's vision of the portion of the Waterfront District as Harcourt is the master development selected by the port. And I am going to turn this over to Tara Sundin, our Economic and Development Manager.
Good afternoon. I am joined today with Ted Carlson and Leslie Bryson. We're going to give you an update on all of the exciting things that are happening on our waterfront right now. We're going to walk through some progress that's occurring in the downtown waterfront area as well as the marine trades area. And we're also going to give you an update on our capital projects, and then I'll finish out this afternoon with an update on Harcourt's vision plan. I hope you've all received an email from me and a memo over the last couple of weeks explaining what that is, and I would like to go through that this afternoon. So I've realized as we start to, we adopted this plan, the waterfront plan, in 2013, and sometimes I make assumptions about what people know about the different planning areas, and I just wanted, I know you all know, but for those that are following along, I wanted to just give a little bit of context about the different areas within the district. So we have 5 different planning areas: the marine trades area, downtown waterfront area, Log Pond, Bellingham Shipping Terminal, and the Cornwall Beach area. 5 different areas, a lot of acreage. The marine trades, Log Pond, and Bellingham Shipping Terminal in gray there. Those areas are planned to be light industrial. They also allow commercial uses They allow institutional uses. The big difference between it and the downtown waterfront area and Cornwall Beach, and I'll touch on that in a second, is residential is not allowed in that area. You're not going to see quite the same scale and density in those areas, so they're to be retained for that light industrial need. The downtown waterfront area and Cornwall Beach, they're zoned for commercial, but if you recall, the Cornwall Beach area we own most of it, and it's planned for park uses. So really that mixed use urban form that is planned for the waterfront district is in that downtown waterfront area. So it's the area closest to our downtown. This red area here is zoned institutional mixed use. From a planner's point of view, there's not a lot of difference there, but the intent was for Western Washington University to locate there, but it allows for the variety of uses that the downtown waterfront area does. So downtown waterfront area, job creation is very important to us, but also housing production for residential uses is important. Supported by some retail. So some exciting things that I want to touch on that other people have been working on. The port has been working with a couple of Bellingham businesses to help them expand and stay in Bellingham. One of those is All American Marine. Their new home is, so they're in Fairhaven now. Their new home is going to be right here along Hilton. That project's underway. It's about a $10 million project, new building. This is going to allow All American Marine to get much bigger contracts, build bigger boats, and it's very exciting. What this also does is it frees up some of our capacity in Fairhaven for businesses to expand into. So our light industrial market's a little tight right now, and so I'm loving to see that spaces are being freed up for others. And that's similar to iTech Energy. iTech is a solar manufacturer. They're located in Iron Gate. I think they're the largest solar manufacturer in the state of Washington. We're lucky to have them in Bellingham. They have outgrown, though, their facility that they owned, and they're leasing some other facilities. iTech is, they're a business that was kind of struggling to find a place to stay here in our city. And we're happy to report that they have found a location. That's this building along Cornwall Avenue. You guys are probably all familiar with it. And they're looking at a purchase from the Port of Bellingham. They're interested in owning their property, and so those negotiations are underway. This will allow this is a 50,000 square foot warehouse, so this is going to allow them to expand quite a bit. And then that additional property upstream, closer to downtown here, will allow them kind of future growth if they can benefit from more growth in this industry. So now we'll focus here on our mixed use area. The Port of Bellingham has hired RAM Construction. RAM is busy conducting the cleanup activities, so you'll see lots of trucks moving dirt around and that rubble. They're spreading all that rubble that's been salvaged from the site around, and it's forming a cap over the site, and it's a very short construction. They should be wrapped up in about 4 to 6 weeks from now. So that's fantastic, and that paves the way then for other developments that Leslie and Ted will talk about for us. But I also want to talk to you a little bit about the Granary building. This is a rendering provided by Harcourt. This is their vision of what the Granary building is going to turn into. They envision a very open marketplace feel on the ground floor. Probably lots of different tenants, but feels very open. And I'll show you some shots of the interior. They're adding on, here this will be more restaurants. And then the second floor and the tower are being converted to offices. So in talking with Pat Power, who represents Harcourt Developments, and how he explains what they're looking for in these first couple projects, is they really want to make sure that they get some uses down here that are going to draw our community, not just offices, but things that all of us can participate in and go to and bring businesses in, and they just need to find uses that are going to bring exposure to this site. So this will be that first piece that should help them do that. So hopefully you've all seen the progress. It just started, though, about 4 weeks ago. This is a shot of Louis. Louis Parr is a Harcourt employee. He moved to Bellingham on June 6th. His family will be moving out, and they're setting up base here. He is the general contractor for Harcourt and has made amazing progress in 4 weeks. It's just stunning. This is a shot of a beam that they just had brought in. That's one piece of wood right there. It's replacing a piece right here. So they're in there cleaning up. You've probably seen the tower is being deconstructed. Although he says the tower itself is actually in good shape. It's the roof that is not. All the windows have been removed, so it's very open. This is ground floor. This is the second floor. This is where offices will go. I think you get a sense of how much light actually, for those of you that have been in the building, I know I just took Dan in, it was always hard to kind of get a feel for what the space, I've always had a vision for the space, but it's just an amazing building. Can't wait. Meanwhile, we need to support this building and Harcourt's plans with the construction of, and Ted, do you want to just stay there and I can flip for you? With the construction of Granary and Laurel Avenue and Whatcom Waterway Park.
So not a lot of new information here from when we last brought this project forward to you, other than the EDI money we just spoke about. The project is well underway in terms of design. We anticipate going to bid right after the first of the year with a winter-spring construction beginning in winter-spring of next year and having at least the first phase of the project completed by July of 2017, so next summer. And that would be the section of Granary to serve the Granary building. So we will likely phase the construction of Granary Laurel into 2 phases, starting at the connection at Roeder so that Granary could be served. The building could be served early in the earliest possible way. So that would be July of next year. And then we would finalize the remainder of the project, continue down Granary, build Laurel, including a new crossing at the railroad, and then make the connection into Cornwall. So again, that project's fully funded. We participated in an open house just this month with Parks, and we had a good turnout for the public meeting, and Leslie can speak a little bit more about that. Not a lot of discussion about the street, although people were excited that it was happening. Maybe go to the next slide. One of the things that's a little bit different about this street is we are going to take the opportunity to build a cycle track. It'll be the first fully separated cycle track in the city. So it will actually be a 2-way cycle track. Maybe the next slide would be a little bit easier. The lane configuration is both Granary and Laurel are going to be 2 lanes, so we'll have 2 lanes of travel for general vehicles. We'll have on-street parking. And then on the Granary section, there'll be a 2-way cycle track on the water side, so closest to the Whatcom Waterway. And then that will actually continue along Laurel. On Laurel, the cycle track will be on the north side of Laurel and make the connection all the way over into Cornwall. So we'll have separated bike facilities as well as nice wide sidewalks throughout the whole section. Street trees, all of the things that were identified when we went through the planning process and developed the development guidelines for the waterfront sub-area plan. So things are moving forward quite nicely and working very closely with the Parks Department because the Granary Street will be right adjacent to the Whatcom Waterway Park. So unless there's any questions on this, that's really all I had to provide, just a very brief update.
Councilmember Hamel.
I'm really pleased to see this 2-way cycle track separated from the roadway. I'm just wondering, is there a plan to then extend this at all? Is that possible to extend this out of either Granary or Laurel?
It will go all the way through the site, the two-way cycle track, and tie into on Bay Chestnut bike lanes on Bay Chestnut. That was the most challenging portion, was how do we do the intersections with the two-way cycle track? And we had a team of folks with the city as well as our consultants trying to really come up with a safe way to negotiate that intersection and transition onto the bike lanes on the Bay Chestnut Bridge. On Cornwall, we haven't come up with the full connection on Cornwall Avenue there, although there's room there for a bike lane at some point in the future. So the separated facility will just be the entirety of Granary Laurel, but it will ultimately tie into bike facilities on both sides.
Thank you.
And Leslie Bryson, Parks and Recreation Director, with an update on Whatcom Waterway Park. We're continuing with our Phase 1 development area. It's slightly reconfigured from the original plan we were looking at in our basis of design. We're also including the central pier now in this first phase. As Ted mentioned, we had our public meeting a couple of weeks ago, had a really good turnout, about 100 people came. 2 years ago, when we had a meeting on the park, we had 30 people. So it was nice to see a lot increased interest in this project. We got a lot of good comments about what people want to see in the park. We're planning to finish the design later this year and put it out to bid to start construction early next year, and hopefully get that first phase of the park completed fall of 2017. This is our revised concept based on the new configuration of the park. We're working with Harcourt on the interface between the building and the park and the pier for building access and separating private spaces from public spaces. We're also working with the port. They would be responsible for building the temporary moorage out into the waterway per our agreement. They are looking at the possibility and feasibility of removing the bulkhead and making more of a softened edge along the Whatcom Waterway there. We have a placeholder to put the acid ball. I understand we're not supposed to call it acid ball, but I think everybody knows that's the big ball that's sitting next to the digester tanks. It's a nice scale for this size of park, and to have that be a visual at the entrance. We're also working with Tara and the Arts Commission on a plan for art, because of the 1% for art. We'll be utilizing the money, the 1% from the road project and the 1% for the art, from the park project, to incorporate art into this first phase. So some of the things we heard from the community, the biggest things are to have walkways and pathways and promenades and nice landscaping, and then activity areas both for kids and for adults. So we're having another steering committee meeting coming up, and then we'll have another public meeting. So we're just trying to work through the final design and what types of activities we'll have in the park. Any questions on the park project?
I'm going to ask a quick question, then I'll defer. So when you said a softer edge, does that mean we're going to get a beach?
It would be like a beach. It might be a rocky beach, but not as, maybe hopefully similar to what we have at Boulevard Park now.
Okay.
Not a white sand beach, though. Yeah.
Councilmember Hamel and Barker.
The temporary moorage there at the top of the screen, is that for kayaks and paddle boards and things like that? Is that for access for citizens?
Yes, that would be access either. It could even be for sailboats, smaller sailboats or power boats. And we could also have a ramp that the parks, we might build as part of the park, that ramp that goes down to the water there. We saw those in Portland along the river where people can hand carry a kayak down the ramp to get in the water. So that's another option.
Where would people park for that?
There's going to be a lot of surface parking at this site for a while. We looked at carving out some parking actually along the front, some pull-in parking, and it takes up about half of the park site, just the depth to get a one-way in, one-way out parking. And the steering committee didn't feel like that was worth taking up that much parkland for parking, when there will be quite a bit of parking nearby.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Barker.
I'm interested in, I imagine it came up at the committee, the issues that we have at the park just down the street. and ways that we might use this as a prototype to see things we could do to not run into the same issues as we had before. So I would like to hear if there was any feedback on that.
Well, one of the things that I think is very important is Harcourt's vision for the granary building. And as Tara mentioned, putting things in the building that will bring people to this area, restaurants and retail, and not just offices. That will have people here at all times of the day and into the evening. And putting activities, we're really focusing on placemaking here so we can have good activities for people to do, people of all ages to do. And not just relying on other people to program this space, but to really fill it up with activities. People do want the opportunity to have markets and special events down here, so we need to leave some on program space for that, but having the great lawn area and being able to set things up along the pier. I think the difference there is that's kind of all we did at Maritime, plus the amphitheater, to have something for children to do, an interesting artwork for people to look at, different activities, and really being on the water is also going to be a big draw here.
Councilmember Barker, go ahead.
And you mentioned in your last presentation, you're really looking at some new innovative ways to engage teens, young adults. Was there anything that came up different about this space than what we typically do?
Nothing particular that came up in the public meeting. Slacklining was something that was on the list. There's a lot of ideas that came out of the public, so we want to look for things for all ages. It's a relatively small site, so we don't have a lot of room to do a lot of different things, but yeah, try and have something for kids, adults, teenagers to enjoy down here.
Council members, any additional questions? Go ahead, Tara.
You know I have more.
Okay.
Okay, so as you can see, this is our area of focus. Getting greenery and Laurel constructed and Whatcom Waterway is the focus of the cities. And greenery building is the focus of Harcourt. But Harcourt's also having to look forward because they're at a point where they're trying to attract big dollars. This is a big project. And in doing so, they've identified some things that they would like changed about they have a slightly different vision, but very similar in a lot of ways. And so they've presented us with a vision plan. And I want to share that with you. I've emailed this to you, and I believe it was covered in the Weekly last week. And I don't know that it was in the Herald, but it's getting out there in the public. So this is their vision plan. This is, it doesn't describe any detail. It doesn't necessarily describe uses or how tall things are, but generally depicts where they see roads aligning and where they see their development paths being and where they see park spaces. And so I want to start with comparing this to the adopted master plan. And before I do that, I do want to mention that Harcourt they have entered into an agreement with the port for about 18 acres. And they purchased that as they're ready to build. And that acreage extends, it takes up almost most of the downtown waterfront area, but it also extends slightly into the Log Pond area. None of their plans contemplate changes to the marine trades area or the shipping terminal area or the Cornwall Beach area. But you see that they have presented some ideas for the Log Pond area. I can tell you that our staff has given them some feedback saying, I think that Urban Forum's encroaching a little bit too far into the Log Pond area, but certainly have a community conversation about that. So this is the adopted plan, and so some of the commonalities are they've maintained this public access all along Whatcom Waterway, which is indeed important to us in the community. They've maintained all the same access points at Granary, at Bay Street. They're envisioning similar to what we had envisioned as You could come off of Bay Street into our site and have a parking garage, and it could serve two purposes, parking vehicles, but also accessing the site. Cornwall, and let's see, they've got Cornwall and Laurel. And then commercial, this is a slight difference. They do have a potential location or access point of commercial, recognizing that the railroad tracks need to be relocated regardless of what plan in order to put another bridge into and over the site. And then, of course, the mixed-use form is consistent also, despite this a little bit too much encroachment probably into the light industrial area. The differences are, you can see that they have used the city's grid system that's in downtown and Old Town rather than the other alignment that's similar to the Arts District. There's a lot of community discussion about this a few years ago. This works, it certainly works very well for Greenery and Laurel, and you're seeing us build something that's consistent with this plan. Could also, what we're building, accommodate commercial green if we indeed built this. But their vision is slightly different for the second park. So we've got Whatcom Waterway Park, but their vision for the park that runs through the site is, rather than coming off commercial and connecting with Whatcom Waterway, is to take this kind of gateway to the waterfront district and pull us through the site to connect up with the Cornwall Beach area. Those are the two probably most significant changes between the two plans. The other piece is that they have placed an emphasis on the board mill building. Harcourt Developments sees that this building has reuse potential, and so they've really strengthened those two buildings, and how they describe them to me is these are kind of the two bookends of which they could fill in with. This plan, I don't think we were certain that somebody would be interested in redeveloping the board mill building. So we have to be, I guess, open to new situations or new pieces of information, such as the interests of the development community. We generally, staff agrees. I mean, we think that things are pretty much in line with the plan, and we're certainly open to changes, although we're not thrilled, Jean, to start another planning process. So, so we've made it pretty clear to Harcourt that our priority really is to get people down to this waterfront district. We want Bellingham to have access to this district, and our focus should be on implementing Greenery and Laurel and Whatcom Waterway Park and Greenery building. Harcourt also needs to develop a proposal by November on their second building, so they're kind of contemplating what that second building is going to be, and they need to submit that to the port by November, so that's also an area of focus for them. We've let them know, Harcourt and the port, that they could submit for an amendment to the plan, and we talk about it as an amendment. It's not changing, marine trades, shipping terminal, or Cornwall Beach. It's really focused mostly on that downtown waterfront area, and again, a lot of those uses are consistent. So it would be an amendment. The earliest that they could seek to begin that process would be April of next year. And the very soonest that you would ever probably be seeing it in here would be the following year. Of course, any change to the plan requires approval of you, and I think you're all aware that we have entered into agreements with the Port of Bellingham. So pretty much any change it requires both entities' approval following a public process. Do you have any questions?
Councilmember Barker.
It wasn't quite clear to me because of the institutional area there. If on their plan, would we be losing any light industrial? compared to the original?
So this is creeping into the light industrial here. This plan has been presented to Western Crossing, as well as Western, and Western is supportive. Western did not want to reuse the board mill building, so they were not interested in keeping it. The idea would be that Western would move on this side of the building, of board mill, excuse me, and they'd be able to use that conference facility. So there's actually, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. If the board mill building was redeveloped into a conference facility. But the port is trying to figure out how to keep Western over there and not eat into as much of the light industrial area. The port's also looking at, because the tracks are probably going to be in place where they are for a while, there's some property, we call it the Lignin warehouse or the Lignin building, which is close to downtown. They're looking at putting industrial into that. So probably make up that industrial acreage closer to downtown.
Council members, any additional?
It's very exciting to see it finally begin.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Anyone else? No? Any other comments? Okay, thank you very much for that. This is very exciting. I know everybody in the city is, woohoo, things are happening down there, so that's good news. And Tara, if I could I have a digital presentation or a copy of this presentation?
Yes.
So I can put the vision of the park, at least tonight, to show people, because that I think is going to be probably where most interest lies right now. Thank you. And we are on item number 8. We are whittling down. Okay, so this is an update on the medical marijuana industry. If some of you are familiar, in 2015, state legislature passed the Cannabis Patient Protection Act, and it revamped the medical marijuana structure in Washington pretty much as of July 1st. Recreational and medicinal are now under the same laws, under the Liquor and Cannabis Board. And as of July 1st, collective gardens are no longer allowed, and all sales of medical marijuana must occur at a state licensed store. And I'm going to turn it over to Kurt Nabafeld, our senior planner, and Alan Mariner, our deputy city attorney, to give us a little bit more information.
Good afternoon, and thank you. We just wanted to give you a brief update on the combining of the medical marijuana and recreational systems. The council in the past has taken several actions on this, whether it be interim ordinances, moratoriums, and has always expressed support for the medical or the availability for patients to obtain their medical marijuana. So as of July 1st, as mentioned, the state now requires all of these facilities to be licensed. Those were all changes of combining the two systems into one regulated system, whereas the medical system was not as regulated as the new recreational system was. So in our attempt to work with these existing facilities over the last year, we kind of took a 3-step approach to it. Originally, back in the end of 2015, we sent out a letter that indicated, sent a letter to the existing facilities, medical facilities, making sure that they were aware of the state changes, making sure that they understood that they had an opportunity to apply for licensing, and just to help them through that process. Again, in mid-2016, we sent them a second letter indicating as of July 1st, you cannot be open. It would be against state law to be operating after that. July 1st has come. With help from the police department, we went out and inspected all of the existing medical facilities. At last count, we had 10 known medical collective gardens in operation. 2 of those facilities were able to obtain licenses from the state and are now operating. The vast majority of the rest of the collectives all closed as of July 1st. At least their buildings have notices on them and indicating that. We do have one facility that is still operating. The city has been in pretty close contact with this individual about why they're operating still, kind of next steps. We've informed them that they are in violation of the state law, and operating in that manner is at their risk. We also understand that the marijuana system is a very complex system, and when you transfer and move from an unregulated system to a regulated system, it takes a little bit of time. The rules for marijuana have been around for several years now, and we're still receiving updates to state laws to deal with those changing circumstances. So we understand it's going to take a little bit of time. In speaking with the sole business still operating in the medical field, they have expressed some concerns for their patients about the ability to obtain medical grade marijuana, as well as the new state registration system. In order to obtain medical marijuana, you have to be entered into a state system. In order to enter people into the state system registry, you have to take a 20-hour training class and become a consultant. The state has offered those within the last month, so most of the facilities are becoming trained. But we realize it's taking a little bit of time to get there. We've also had some concern expressed about the availability of medical grade marijuana. I've spoken with several retailers, and one of the things that they have indicated is that there were some definitely changes. The types of medical marijuana that were available are no longer allowed because the state is regulating them, and they're safer now. That's one of the main reasons that the state required these to go through a certification process and to regulate that, because before, when you were going to your collective garden, you really didn't know what was going into the product, who was making it, and how it was being made.
Kurt, can I just is that like on pesticides or organics? Is that the
everything?
Kind of
Yep, that's part of it, right? So the market is kind of responding to that. It's taking a little bit of time to respond to that, where you've got these initial producers and processors that haven't, they're not making that type of product that was once available, though unregulated. They're now converting it and starting to see how the market will push for that. So we're seeing a little bit of a time delay. Speaking with one of the collectives that obtained their retail licensing, they believe that that's something that is more about patients getting used to the type of marijuana that's out there now versus not enough. So they believe that there's definitely product available for people. It's just different. I did want to update you on the total number of recreational retail facilities. As you may recall, the city has allocated 12 licenses. We currently have 9 operating retail facilities. 2 of them three other ones that have obtained their licenses are slowly working through the building permit process and getting all of their other local approvals to open. So Bellingham has reached its allocation of 12 licenses, retail licenses, so we won't be seeing any more unless there's changes to the state at that point. So back to the lone operating store, our intent at this point is to continue to work with them. We do have some options that we're evaluating with the police department as well as the legal department of what steps we should take. We do want to make it clear to that operator that they are not in compliance with the law, and it is so at their risk.
Kurt, can I ask one more question? Does every location need to offer medical?
They do
they
not.
Have
That was an option that the state get as a way, when they combined the two systems, they wanted to make sure that medical patients did have availability to them. So if you are an existing retail facility, you could obtain a medical endorsement. That medical endorsement means you go through the training, you register people, you can do consultations with them. It's not prescription providing. In order to obtain medical marijuana, you have to go to a doctor or someone that can issue the prescription, and then you take that prescription to the retail facility. They enter you into the system, and then you can buy it without having to pay some of the taxes that are associated with the recreational side.
Do we know how many of these actually have that option? Because I know the questions we get are usually about medical accessibility. So just curious if...
So speaking with one of the licensed retail facilities that has their medical endorsement, they have chosen not to go forward, even though they have their medical endorsement. Their staff has been trained. There's originally there was some issues encountered at the state level regarding the registry system. So that took a little bit of time to work out. As of I made another call this morning to another facility, and they said that those tweaks have been, those bugs have been fixed. I think the one facility that has not instituted it, they're a little leery because of what they have to do. They didn't think that it was going to be as much. For example, when you do come in, as a medical patient does come in, you have to get your picture taken. So these facilities now have to have some sort of picture-taking technology, whether it be a photo booth or whether it be through an iPhone, and then they also have to issue these cards and a laminate. So not all of the facilities that have their medical endorsements are currently issuing or selling medical grade into patients. So I haven't contacted all of them. I know of at least 2 that are.
Okay, thank you. 2 so far.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's just within the city of Bellingham. There are other stores outside in Whatcom County as such as well. So I think, you know, the concern is what we have heard is will people have the availability to obtain their medicine? At this point, from what I've heard, it's out there. It may not be exactly what they were used to, but what the retailers are telling me is that what they were used to was not regulated. You didn't really know what was going into it. So now you do. Now you've got a certification. Now you know you're getting a safe product.
Alan, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
I just want to, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kurt, but I think didn't all of the 12 retail establishments also get the medical endorsement?
Correct, yeah. All 12 licenses that Bellingham have will have that medical endorsement associated with them. So,
that's
there will be, you know, once they get up and running and everything, there will be at least 12 locations within the city that people can obtain their medical marijuana.
Okay. The council, any questions? No? Okay, well, thank you very much. We appreciate the update. I'm sure the community does as well, so thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, and we are on item number 9. Woohoo! Okay. And this is a work session for the review of the draft 26 comprehensive plan, specifically the land use chapter and housing. So we have made a couple adjustments on this since it was originally published. Staff, we're going to start with staff will highlight the key changes to the updated land use chapter and housing chapter of the 2016 plan. And, okay, and then suggested, which includes the Planning Commission's recommendations. Suggested changes will be incorporated into a comment tracker and incorporated into the final plan upon recommendation for the council. We were going to have a presentation by Michael Lewis that has been postponed until further notice. We've had a fair amount of interest in that. But we will still be having our 15-minute public comment period after this presentation. And again, I'm going to be keeping that to 15 minutes because we have an executive session. And I'm going to refer to Councilmember Gene Knutson.
Yes, I just want to make a statement. A couple months ago, I was approached by members of the BIA and the Realtor Committee about having a presentation. Well, I didn't do my homework very well on that. I did not ask my committee members. I did not ask the full council. So at this time, I'm going to make an apology to the council president, the council members, staff, citizens, BIA, and the members of the Realtor Association, and especially to our planning staff. Please, everybody, express your anger and frustration towards me. I own this. I just did this by myself. I've been up here far too long to make a mistake like this, and it'll never happen again. And I shouldn't have done it. And I apologize for it. I just hope that in the future, we can include this and all interested groups in having a presentation like that. So my sincere apologies, and please, if you're out there watching this on television, don't come tonight and hammer the council over this. Hammer me. Thank you.
And for us, this means that we're probably going to have a different kind of discussion on how we bring items forward, because traditionally, as long as they've come to the chair and the chair finds room for the agenda, we move forward. So this is a discussion for our council at another time, how we take a look at our process. So with that, I am going to turn it over to staff. And I have Lisa on here, but I see Greg sitting there, so I'll turn it over to Greg.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Council. Greg Ockett, Planning and Community Development Department. With me today is Lisa Poole and Chris Behe.
Is your mic on, Greg?
I believe it is, yeah. We'll have a brief presentation for Council addressing some of the issues that came up at the last work session on these chapters. And we're going to continue this discussion to your August 1st meeting, when we have a couple of hours with you where we can devote more time than we have obviously this afternoon. And we can talk schedule at the end of the meeting, but we've got a number of meetings coming up. On the 25th, I believe we have the Economic Development chapter and the Environment chapter, so it keeps rolling on. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris, and he'll talk about the first few slides of the presentation.
Thank you. Chris Behe, Planning Department. So again, as Greg just said, we'll talk about some of the key issues. I'm going to address a few of the land supply related things, and then Lisa will take off from there and cover some of the state requirements and the other changes in the update. So we've heard a lot of feedback through the public comment tracker, comments from you folks and others just about a lot of the complexities of land supply and dealing with issues around housing and the various parts of the methodology that went into that analysis. So the first 4 slides I'm stepping through here are just providing some more background detail on the specific steps and some of the numbers that relate to those. So you can see one of the criticisms that we've heard a lot is that we do have capacity for growth, but that the existing lots we have are too encumbered by critical areas to meet our capacity. Stepping back and looking at the big picture citywide, if we do look at all of the vacant land that we have that's zoned for residential use, whether that be single family or multifamily or the mixed use zones, if we were to just take those number of acres and take the density that's allowed on those, we would actually have capacity for about 34,000 housing units. What we're recommending in our 20-year growth period, so from this year out to 2036, is capacity to accommodate about 16,000 housing units to meet that 31,050 population figure. So we're really counting about 47% of our kind of paper or theoretical capacity. And so what I'll show are what deductions we take out of that really big number to get to the 16,000 number, and to kind of illustrate why we feel that is a realistic and a relatively conservative estimate. And one other point before I leave this slide, the methodology that we use for this comp plan analysis is much like the one we did in 2006. It's also the same methodology that the county planning department and also all of the small towns planners got together first in 2009 and again in 2013 and put together a methodology that we could all jointly agree upon. And that's based largely on the state's DC-TED, the Department of Community Trade and Economic Development, on their prescribed buildable lands methodology. So it's a very well-known cookbook approach to taking vacant land and boiling it down to what's truly developable at the end of the day. And so it's not a new or unused approach. It's something we've adopted, and it's really what all of the buildable lands growth management counties in the state are using. So again, nothing innovative or on the edge. It's the standard for doing this kind of work. And then specifically addressing the criticism that we need to increase, or just highlighting the issue that we need to increase the amount of single-family housing in the city. We are building quite a few single-family homes. Over the last 3 years, we've averaged about 140 single-family units per year. We do think we're in a catch-up mode after the recession, and I'll finish with a slide showing the permits issued, and you can see the clear dip and then recovery happening with that. On paper, after the analysis that we've done, we think we have capacity for just under 6,000 single-family homes over the next 20 years. And we have recently, since 2006, since the last comp plan, we've annexed hundreds of acres of residential land. The big areas that you can probably think of in your head would be the bulk of the King Mountain neighborhood, which is a mix of single-family and multifamily residential zoning. The Pacific Highway annexation, which is a mix of residential and industrial, and then just this last year, actually in February of this year, the East Bakerview, Mount Baker Highway annexation, which was again a mix of residential and industrial. This map just illustrates the land supply from looking at the single-family residential areas. If you can make out the areas that are kind of I guess it's a tan or a light orange color. Those are the single-family zoning areas that have large vacant holdings. The red areas that are highlighted are single-family lots of record. So those are parts of existing plats that are adjacent to streets that are built today. They're adjacent to water and sewer utilities. They are not impacted by wetlands, and they're at least 4,000 square feet in size. So they're what we would call a buildable lot. They don't necessarily have a water meter hooked up yet, but it would take minimal effort to build on those lots. Not every one of them are lots that we're counting over the next 20 years. There's a variety of them, 15 to 25% that we take out for a market factor, and that's because some people own a side yard that they just want to keep. They like having a large yard. Some people have lots that are downhill from them that they keep for view protection. Some lots are just odd shapes. They might be a significant acreage, but maybe they're a triangle that just doesn't accommodate a house with a driveway very easily. But there are a large number of these that we are counting in our future supply. And then in addition to that, the purple areas that you can see, there's kind of 4 or 5 pockets of development you can see on here. Those are the more recently approved or pending single-family plats, and we have 664 buildable lots in those areas. You can see the area up at the north end of town that's largely owned by the Kaitak company. A lot of those, phase 1, which is a 42-unit housing unit development, is actually underway right now. There are the holdings around King Mountain owned by the Black brothers. There's a phase of that that's being developed right now as well. And then there are a variety of other ones in the Whatcom Falls and Puget neighborhoods above Lakeway that are also various phases have already been built, and there are phases with capacity left. And so all of those taken together, as of about a month ago, had capacity for about 664 additional single-family lots. And again, those are completely through the process. There isn't a percentage of those that will be undevelopable. Those are platted lots. So this just illustrates, again, that buildable lands methodology. Again, if you take everything on that previous map that I showed you, there were about 2,600 acres of land represented there. And the portions of those that were not purple or red, so it'd be that kind of background tan color, of those acres, we take out 544 acres of wetlands and slopes and floodplains and other critical areas. We take out 376 acres for future public uses. So those are things like future parks, future public facilities, if we need a fire station, sewer pump station, those kinds of things, something that consumes land for public use, parks being the largest one in this case. We take out 463 acres for infrastructure, and those are largely the roads, right-of-way, and stormwater detention kinds of facilities. And then, like I said, the market factor. So things that we just don't think in the next 20 years are going to develop. For vacant land, we take out, depending on if it's completely vacant or partially vacant, we take out between 15 and 25% and just say there's a percentage that won't happen between now and 2036. That represents about 245 acres of those areas you saw that were zoned for single family. And we're left with about 990. So basically, we're removing about 62% of what looks developable and saying it's encumbered by something, or we think it's going to be dedicated for some other use than an actual home with a yard and a driveway. One other thing in addition to this, in the urban growth area and the recently annexed areas like around King Mountain and Pacific Highway where we have the URMX zoning, which is a mixed-use zone, those zones have a range of residential densities that are allowed. So you might have 6 to 10 units per acre, 6 to 12, or 10 to 24. In all of those cases, you can get to the high end of the density by taking advantage of TDRs or PDRs or other density bonuses. We've always assumed in this analysis the bottom end of that spectrum. So we're counting, if it's 6 to 10 or 6 to 12, we're counting 6 units per acre in those zones. If it's a 10 to 24, we're counting 10 units per acre. So that's really based on the performance that we've seen in the past, what developers in those zones, because they've been in place since 1997, what we've seen the existing plating pattern be, and that's typically been close to that 6 unit per acre density. So again, we're being as conservative and realistic as possible. We're not counting 24 units per acre for future capacity, even though some people could do that if they chose. We just say we're not counting that. Looking at the multifamily side of the spectrum, of those 16,000 some housing units, we think this is going to be about 11,000, a little more than 11,000 housing units by 2036. The urban villages that we have master planned in town, you can see those highlighted in pink on the map here. We expect those to accommodate about just under 6,500 of those units. And then, so that represents about a third of our citywide housing and about a little over 50% of our multifamily housing. And then the remaining multifamily units will be spread in these, what you see as the kind of light orange areas on the map, which are the residential multi-zoned areas or mixed-use areas within our existing zoning. And we think that's just under 5,000, about 4,700 housing units. One thing to emphasize is that the urban villages with those 6,000 some housing units, those are all landing in areas that are completely served today with adequate transportation, utilities, and services. We don't have to provide anything additional there. That's all ready to go. There won't be any additional city costs to serve those areas by adding residential units to those areas.
Chris, while we're on that map, can I stop just for 1 second? The pink area on the top, is that Barclay up in there?
Yes, so we count, well, we have adopted since 2006 master plans for downtown, the waterfront, Old Town, and the other areas. Barclay Village predates the last comp plan update, and it's called an urban development center in what used to be the Mount Baker neighborhood plan. It's now the Barclay neighborhood plan. And it has a lot of the mixed-use zoning and other kinds of amenities that are described in the other urban village plans. So we count that as an urban village, even though it's not named as such. It behaves a lot like an urban village.
But it's all multifamily, not in no single...
Barclay actually has a mix. The bulk of it is zoned for multifamily, and we expect the bulk of it to be multifamily, but there is the Brandywine and Sussex streets on the far east end, which are single family. There's some single family attached and then also single family detached that's already there, that's already been built. And then there is allowance for a percentage of single family in the rest of the area as well, although we haven't seen that has not been built yet.
Thank you.
So again, looking at the same kind of methodology for the areas that are not part of the urban villages, we have the urban villages represented here in this pie chart. For the other multifamily zones throughout the city, we take out 114 acres of critical areas, 86 acres of those future public uses, 57 infrastructure acres, and then 64 market factor acres. And we end up with about 260 acres of net buildable land, and that's what we think we're going to be able to accommodate about 4,700 multifamily units. And then we have, so that we're basically taking out about 55% of what we'd call vacant developable land from that supply before we say how many multifamily units can we accommodate. And then in the urban villages, we have capacity within each of those master plans and the phasing plans that are part of those. We have capacity for just under 12,000 housing units in the urban villages. We think, because those are all phased, we think some of them will probably build out by 2036, but there are some significant ones that we know have some real environmental challenges and also just some longer development horizons. And so we're only counting about 54% of those 12,000 units during this planning period. We're saying for Old Town and for Samish Way and for the waterfront in particular, a large part of that's going to be pushed out beyond 2036. And so that's for a future plan. We're not counting that. We know it won't happen in this time span. So again, we're trying to be conservative, we're trying to be realistic, we're looking at the phasing plans that a lot of thought and labor went into, and we're saying we're only going to count that much. And so this is the slide I'll finish on before handing off to Lisa. This just illustrates the development that, again, multifamily is the dark orange and single family is the yellow on top of the bars. These are the residential permits issued per year over since 2004. You can see the pattern you're all used to looking at in these bar charts, the recession here where we went down to building just 70-some units per year. And then you can see the last 3 years we've really climbed back up, not to pre-recession levels, but to what we hope is a more sustainable level. And we think some of this is being in catch-up mode, but it will stabilize over the next few years as well. And you can see that we're building, the average over the past 3 years has been about 140 units per year. If you look at the mix that we've built since the last comp plan was adopted from 2006 to 2015, it's been about 1/3 single family and 2/3 multifamily, which is the growth, the ratio that we're projecting forward for new residential growth. And that's exactly the ratio that's reflected in our existing land supply, and it's the ratio that we were forecasting in the last comp plan. So we're holding true to that kind of 1/3 single family, 2/3 multifamily mix that we projected we would be.
Good afternoon, Lisa Full, Planning. So I'll just briefly touch on a few more key issues, and then we'll go into some state requirements and some key changes. So we just wanted to highlight some of the city efforts related to housing. And we have been streamlining our permitting processes through applying lean techniques, which focuses on maximizing customer value and minimizing waste. We also have several funding opportunities that we allocate to support housing, human, and social services for low-income people in the community, as well as several incentives programs. And then we're going to be updating our accessory dwelling unit ordinance, as well as our subdivision ordinance, and the infill housing toolkit, which you're familiar with, was enacted in 2009. So most of these key issues were taken from last council meeting, where you said you wanted to discuss these issues in further detail. So inclusionary zoning was one of those, and the question was, why would we need to regulate affordable housing through such methods as inclusionary zoning when we have incentives? Well, incentives are optional, so we don't often get affordable housing in the areas where we most need it. Inclusionary zoning requires a certain percentage of units that are affordable to low and moderate income populations, and that's typically for an extended amount of time. So there would be further study needed to determine if something like this is appropriate for Bellingham, and additional public and legislative processes would be needed to put a program like this in place here. There was a question regarding policy H15, and that is specific to the chat report. This was one source for our housing policy foundation in the plan. A refinement of the chat report did occur through city group and city study. We pulled out the relevant recommendations from that plan. So staff suggests modifying policy H15 to say that we're continuing implementing the recommendations of the city group, and then listing out the policy bullets under that, and just removing references to the chat report. Detached ADUs, there's been much discussion regarding that, and staff feels that neighborhoods that have not been characterized as containing high numbers of legal and illegal units and are supportive of this should have the opportunity to be considered for these uses. Any revision to the ADU ordinance requires public and legislative processes. The comp plan just sets in place a policy foundation. And there are other reasons to update the ordinance in a timely fashion. The existing ordinance states that when neighborhoods reach a certain number of legal units, that we must go back and revisit that ordinance. And we have reached a certain number of units, legal units, in at least one neighborhood. So we need to update this ordinance pretty soon. And then just some of the state requirements as we were going through our update. We looked at the state checklist, and we did this for all of our chapters, and we're in conformance with state requirements. And these are just a few specific to the land use section. The land use policy foundation in the existing 2006 comp plan that we're continuing to carry forward. It talks about compact form through infill, primarily within our city limits, and coordinating land use and transportation planning in our urban villages and along certain transportation corridors. And there are others listed there that you can see. So just a few key changes by focus area, and we do have 5 focus areas that were identified last year and vetted through public process, and those include housing, urban villages, health, sustainability, and innovation. For housing, we're looking at senior housing and multi-generational communities, student housing, of course, accessory dwelling units, and then for urban villages, we're really focusing on implementing those urban village plans that we have in place now. And then health is a new focus for our comprehensive plan. We had the Whatcom County Health Department conducted an audit of our plan, and they provided several recommendations that you can see throughout the plan. Sustainability. At the last meeting, there was a question about what does sustainability mean. And if you look on page 10 of the comprehensive plan introduction, as well as page 11 of the land use chapter, you'll see what we mean by sustainability when we're talking about it as it pertains to the focus areas. We're really looking at society, economy, and environment, and how those 3 things can work together and work in concert. So the legacies and strategic commitments that the City Council adopted in 2009 really encompass all of these elements, and you'll see them throughout the plan. We're also talking about resiliency to adverse events such as natural disasters and climate change, and then innovative means of transitioning UGA land to the city and increasing the future share of urban growth. So the memo that was provided to you for today's meeting includes all of the Planning Commission's recommendations, and we just sort of synthesized them here, so I won't go through them, but they basically had these 5 pertaining to the land use chapter. So did you want to talk about the land use chapter and then go to housing, or how would you like to handle that?
Mine are all combined.
Council, to the council, is it okay to put it all together? Are we all right with that? Okay, please continue.
Okay. So there are several state requirements for housing, and those are listed here. I did just want to read that according to GMA, the purpose of the housing chapter is to ensure the vitality and character of established residential neighborhoods, encourage the availability of affordable housing to all economic segments of the population, promote a variety of residential densities and housing types, and encourage the preservation of the existing housing stock. And then these other elements are included in our chapter. So the policy foundation listed in the 2006 comp plan related to housing is increased housing density and infill in urban villages, transit corridors, and other appropriate areas, providing a mix of housing sizes, types, and prices, affordable wages, jobs nearby, and increased housing opportunities for a broad range of income levels, and then viable and healthy neighborhoods. And this is just an example of some of the policy foundations that we're carrying forward. So once again, those key changes by the 5 focus areas, and you'll see a lot of overlap with these between the chapters, especially as they relate to housing and land use. Housing for unsheltered and homeless, we talked a lot about that in the 2006 plan, but in the 2016 plan, we actually include policies and goals to support doing this. Student housing, senior housing, smaller housing, implementing existing urban village plans, and then all of our health-related goals and policies. Sustainability, once again, the legacies and resiliency to adverse events, and then innovation. We feel like a lot of these policies are pretty innovative, and you can see some of those listed there. We've got workforce housing and our incentives program. Then as far as the Planning Commission's recommendations, you'll see some of those listed here, and I would refer to your memo for the exact language. These are just synthesized. But they did talk a lot about policy H7, and they modified that, so I call your attention to that. I'd also call your attention to policy H17, where they removed the inclusionary zoning policy. And then these are the last 3. So with that, that's the end of our presentation. We're happy to take questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa and Chris. Council, who wants to start? Councilmember Parker.
Okay. It's been a long process. I started this as a constituent, and now I'm sitting up here, and I, of course, want to thank staff. You guys do a lot of work on this, and I know we come at it very scrutinizing as from constituents and us, but I do recognize a lot of the amazing work that's in here regarding our legacies, so thank you. That's my positive part. So, Chris, I did want to pass on a compliment that I try to attend at least one neighborhood meeting. I've been trying, and almost every single one I've been to, you've been mentioned specifically as somebody that they've really enjoyed working with, and anytime they've needed information, they've gotten it from you. So thank you for that, and your presentations are always really digestible for me. So with that said, one thing caught my eye in all of this, and it's language that we talked about. We talk about infill strategy as an environmental key, and we talk about infill strategy as a financial key, because we need to build where we don't have to do a lot of resources. And with all the things going on in society and all the difficulties we see in trying to integrate housing forms, I think it's extremely important that we really take a look at our greenfield areas. And I'm hoping at this point staff of council will go along with me on, I guess I want to put a motion forward. Sorry. So where appropriate, encourage mixed housing targeted towards integration of families, persons of various social income status and greenfield development through enhancements or incentives. And I think the reason why I say greenfield is because we're seeing where we have certain zoning that still has some legacies of exclusion, and how difficult it is. We see the builders coming forward and saying we want to try it, and we see the neighborhoods saying we're not really sure what that's going to look like, we don't want it. And I think that anytime we go forward in greenfield, we should really try to give a great example of how we want to do it. So I've spoken a bit with planning staff on this. It didn't seem to have too many rubs. So that would be my first motion as far as, again, I didn't have specific language. I think that's something that you guys could work on. I think it's what the building industry has been asking us, instead of mandating, to certainly find ways to incentivize. And I'm hoping that'll at least fix the places that we're growing toward.
I'll be honest, I'm not really clear what you're asking for, so maybe the staff, could you clarify? Do you understand what she's asking and what the implications of that is?
Well, she's asking staff to draft policy language similar to what she read. And we're fine with working on that and bringing something back to you for your review.
You need a second on that, I'll do it.
I wrote it down.
Okay.
They have asked them to draft it.
Okay, so we have a motion in front of us and a second. Any discussion? Councilmember Hamel.
Can you reread the motion, please?
Yeah. So this one is a motion to direct staff to add language where appropriate, encourage mixed housing targeted towards integration of families and persons of various social economic status and greenfield development through enhancements and or incentives. So you still having a hard time. So basically we have things like, we'll have large sects in our current zoning where we have single family detached. And then we'll put areas where we do a lot of our multifamily over in a certain area. And everything right now in sociology is saying the more integrated we have our housing types, the better we have less dropout rates, we have better social mobility throughout all the classes. But we tend to continue to build in the old ways that really are based in race and class segregation. And so I'm just asking that we try to figure out how to incentivize builders to really bring a whole different social dynamic of starting in brand new spaces, so we don't have to go back to this where we're trying to figure out where are we going to put affordable housing and how are we going to make sure people are living next door to each other. So that's where that comes from. Does that help a little bit? Thank you.
Councilmember Borneman.
No, I'm ready to vote. I've got another one coming up.
Any other discussion? I will admit that I'm still a little confused in that we're just asking for the staff to look at policy. We're not forcing any kind of inclusion, and staff is willing to pursue. Mayor Kelly.
I'll try to clarify to make sure staff is on the same page as you. I think you're asking to bring forward back some language so you can decide if you want it or not.
Yeah, that's right. By George, I think we've got it.
Yeah. All right, thanks. I just want to make sure when I'm voting on something that I know what I'm voting
Yeah,
for.
and I have it if you need to reread it, so.
Any other discussion? Okay, so I'm going to read that one more time and then we're going to vote on it, okay? Thank you. All right, so the motion is to direct staff to add language where appropriate, or encourage mixed housing targeted toward integration of families and persons of various social income status in greenfield development through enhancements and/or incentives. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Okay, let's continue with questions. Who's next? Councilmember Borneman.
Got a number of them, but the first one I want to bring up is, yeah, that's what I'm doing, is to replace policy number 817, the inclusionary zoning on this. There's a lot of talk in the real estate and the development community about affordable housing, but when it comes to actual implementation, then the mantra switches to the prices at which the market will bear, the highest prices that the market will bear. So even if we were to bring in all of the UGA lands, there is no guarantee that there would be any affordable housing built without subsidies or public involvement in making that happen. Because the price bears no, well, it may make some relationship, but it's not based on what it costs to build, what it last sold for, but it's what the highest price that the market will bear. Without some types of inclusionary zoning in some of the areas, we're not going to get affordable housing unless it's public funded or subsidized. That's my feeling anyway. When we bring property in to the UGA and we upzone, that property and other things there is a benefit given to the people that own that and develop it just based on the upzone. And I think we need to at least look at that policy of inclusionary zoning, keeping it in to look at it. So I would like to make that motion that we keep the exploration of inclusionary zoning, that policy of H15 in place. 17.
Second.
Sorry. Yeah.
Discussion.
I'm going to support the motion. So inclusionary zoning could include not just 60% AMI or like really low income. It could include 80% AMI or 100% AMI. We don't have workforce housing that people can afford to live in and do the work and live here and work here. So I think that generally the policy language should, as Councilmember Borneman mentioned, should stay as it is, as he indicated. Because it gives options on flexibility around what % of the AMI that can be worked with.
I'm not going to vote for inclusionary zoning. I feel like we're not the only ones in the country that don't have affordable housing. This is something that we're all dealing with, and I'm concerned if we put in inclusionary zoning that we are dictating exactly how we want and all the restrictions on our zoning. So I'm hesitant to put inclusionary zoning on there, so I'm just going to tell you that I'm not going to vote for it. Councilmember Barker.
So for me, watching all the Planning Commission, and thanks again for all of their time and service, it's much like we're going to come up to this ADU discussion, and this is a tool in the toolbox. And just like if we were going to implement this, we need to sit down and we have to go through a public process to figure out how to make it happen. So just like I believe that if and you'll hear me talk about ADUs. I really hope we get to a place where we can incentivize and we can figure out with the building community, but there's no reason it can't be in here. And if it comes to a point where we want to do it, we're going to have to go through this whole process and get it into the comprehensive plan, and then we're going to have to get there. And I don't want to have to backtrack. I would love to see it in here. I would really prefer that we figure out how to work with incentives, and then we can decide when it gets to that public process how we want it to look. So I'll be voting to re-include.
Council, any other discussion? Okay.
Just one point on this. I'm not asking us to implement inclusionary zoning, because that's not what this says. All this says is consider developing an inclusionary zoning program as a means of increasing. So it's having that possibility to have a discussion. So I just want to make it clear that I'm not saying let's move forward with it, but
Okay, I see what you're saying. Councilmember Hamel.
I just wanted to clarify. I thought I saw something on one of the slides that indicated a study as it relates to inclusionary zoning, and I'm wondering if we have in place a study establishing a rational nexus between market rate residential and commercial development, and then the need for affordable housing.
We have a study of inclusionary zoning that we did a number of years ago under completely different market circumstances. So that would be the first thing that we would have to do if we were going to consider an inclusionary zoning program, is do a new market study. So I can get you the information from the old study.
Thank you.
Greg, could you tell us why maybe staff chose to remove it, so maybe I can understand?
No, Pinky, staff didn't choose to remove it. That's a planning commission recommendation.
Sorry, the planning commission.
Yeah, well, I think they were, as I recall the discussion, they were concerned that it wouldn't work here, that the market conditions weren't right for an inclusionary zoning program. They were concerned about the unintended consequences, I think they called it, of forcing people to build affordable housing and what that might do to the cost of the other housing in the development. They had a number of questions about how it might work. And of course, we don't have the details of how it might work at this point. We're just talking about policy language. That's what I recall their concerns were. Lisa, do you remember? That was pretty much it. It was I think it was more the idea of requiring people to build affordable housing rather than making it an incentive like we have now.
That's where my concern is, what parameters of requirements that we would be asking for.
And we would need to figure all that out and decide if it could even work here.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay, we have a motion in front of us. So the motion is to reinstate policy H17 to consider developing an inclusionary zoning program as a means of increasing the city's affordable housing supply. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Aye. No. Vote is 5-1. Thank you. Okay, so I just had a comment or a thing about public comment. Just know public comment is coming after the council has had an opportunity to ask questions. So we are going to move through as quickly as we possibly can. Councilmember Barker?
There was a lot of really good language in here regarding the need for alternative housing forms, especially as we're going into a more diverse society. I think it said Bellingham's moved from 12 to 15%, and I've seen some that actually says we're moving to 17% population of color. But there's a much broader, I think, piece of information that I would like to see in the comprehensive plan, and it would be very short, but it's really acknowledging that the current census information right now in the U.S. says that at 5 years and younger, we are a majority minority in the United States, and that by 2020, we will be a majority minority in all youth below the age of 18, and that the U.S. will follow with a similar trend, becoming a majority minority by a nation by 2044. And the reason why I think that's really important is, unfortunately, it is what it is, and we're still trying to fix it through policy, but race and class are so interwoven, and we are growing rapidly in our population of color, and we are hopefully doing the work as policymakers to make sure we can kind of unpack a lot of that and set up everybody for success. But we have to be aware that this is a huge cultural shift we're getting ready to go into. So my motion is to direct staff to add, where appropriate, census data with majority-minority predictions.
Second.
Staff, is that clear? Is that motion clear? Okay, all right. So discussion. Oh, sorry, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
I'll pass that down.
Okay. All right. So our motion is to direct staff to add, where appropriate, census data with majority-minority predictions. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. And we are at almost 4:20. We do have an executive session. We have a public comment. So if we could stick to what our questions are and keep this as brief as possible so we can move on to public comment and we can take a break and have some dinner tonight. Okay. Councilmember Boardman.
Questions or what we want staff to bring, since this is being cut short, I mean, we're not going to, that we want them to bring forward next time so it can be discussed. There's a difference.
Well, if you have a question, then they're going to have to answer it, whether it be now or later in our work sessions.
Yeah, we would appreciate either questions, or if you have specific language for changes that you would like us to investigate. Remember, we do have the August 1st work session on these same two chapters. So,
I'm not going to be here, so I.
Okay, yeah.
And this is the most important issue that we've got, I think.
And this is our work session, so it's not the end of the road. We are.
And if we need additional work sessions,
where appropriate, we will. Okay.
One of the things that's not mentioned in housing forms in here relates to policies regulating boarding homes, particularly in single-family neighborhoods, something that we have a big problem with. We just reported another one over in Seaholm neighborhood, a 2-bedroom house. Somebody bought it, chopped it up into 6 bedrooms, and giving individual contracts. I would really like to see a strong policy in the housing section about the illegality of these boarding homes, the definition, the illegalities of boarding homes in single-family neighborhoods. That works us towards strengthening and putting teeth into regulating those illegal slumlord practices.
Staff, does that need to be a motion or just a request? It's an action item.
if there's support on the council for us to do that work, we'll do the work.
Make it a motion?
I'll make a motion that we direct staff to develop policies relating to regulation of boarding homes, the legality of boarding homes in single-family neighborhoods.
Second.
Okay, discussion. All right.
Roxanne.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Okay, council, questions? Councilman McCormick.
Okay. Somewhere in here, staff had asked, there's an element in here, I forgot to write it down, but on further exploring areas of possibilities of detached ADUs. And I would like to see that policy looked at where it excludes, or maybe instead of exclusion, maybe limit the exploration of detached ADUs to large lot, lower density neighborhoods, excluding small lot, high density neighborhoods. And I would like to make that motion.
Second.
Can you repeat your motion?
No, that we limit the exploration to large lot, lower density neighborhoods, and not in small lot, high density neighborhoods or high density neighborhoods.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Well, I'm just going to refer to what's here on H7, which says, update the cities with priorities, evaluating an inventory of ADUs in the city, identifying appropriate areas, improving and permitting enforcement, and requiring owner-occupied in single-family zones. So to me, those cover are the city's investigation around where appropriate locations are going. So just so you know, I won't vote for that. Councilmember Murphy.
Just similarly, I'm not ready to get that specific.
Yeah.
Councilmember Barker.
Yeah, I won't be supporting that for some specific one. I do like the language, and I know we're going to have to get to the ordinance, so I think that's a place where we could start talking about looking at either within a school district or a school boundary or within a census block of, is this an appropriate housing form for balancing the social economic status in the area. But I think sometimes if you really think there's some really large lots out here and you could end up using a half acre for a 600 or 800 square foot home, where as we move forward, if that's where you press all the ADUs, and as we move forward, we might really want to be very strategic about land use in those spaces. So I appreciate, and I think I know where you're going with that, and I think we could really get at it at the ordinance, but I think that ends up really being a negative land use in the future. So.
The reason I'm throwing that one out there is it's those kind of areas where you've got the small lots where there's the least amount of parking, least amount of room to pack it in. By putting detached ADUs, it already removes the concept of single-family neighborhood to duplex neighborhoods, because you've got two houses on a single lot. That's a duplex, detached duplex. If we want to change the designation of what we call single family, then we should just do that. You know, I'm open to try to explore some areas, but these are the areas where it causes the greatest amount of problems is in the small lots, because there's not room for putting those in, and it's just, you know, it's a poor designation with it. So that's why I throw it out there, trying to be open to looking at some areas where it might be appropriate when you got 20,000 square foot lots as opposed to 5,000.
Councilmember Hamel.
I appreciate the direction that Councilmember Borneman is going, but I think that my thinking is a little more aligned with the Planning Commission's recommendations. Their language here does allow for identifying appropriate areas for detached ADUs, which is to your point. So I'll be supporting that language, but not the language that is being brought up now.
Okay, we have a motion in front of us to change modified policy H7 to limit ADUs in larger lots. I hope I got that right. Detached ADUs in larger lots. Thank you, Greg. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No. Motion fails 4-2. Okay, I'm going to allow for one more, and then we have to move to public comment so we can move to the rest of our meeting and executive session. Councilmember Hamel.
I'm going to move that we adopt the Planning Commission's draft language for policy H7.
Second.
What is H7?
The one we just talked about.
Page
Detached ADUs.
5.
Or page 181 in your booklet.
Yes. Could you read it?
Sure. This is update the city's ADU ordinance with priorities on evaluating and inventorying ADUs in the city, identifying appropriate areas for detached ADUs, improving permitting and enforcement, and requiring owner occupancy in single-family zones.
Discussion. Motion and a second.
Yeah, I'll support this, but one of the reasons I supported Terry is Terry and I have been down this road many, many times. So you'll hear it when the time comes.
Okay. So motion in front of us to approve policy modification H7. All those in favor, please say aye.
We've got discussion yet.
Sorry,
there were two hands up for discussion.
Okay, Councilmember Portman.
Yeah, I think April was up before I was. So
Okay.
I'm on.
There you go. I have a difficulty in this because I do appreciate the staff's original language that I think allows for a little more flexibility, because yet again, we're just trying to get it on the books so then we can go through that public process of developing the ordinance. And in looking at case studies up and down the West Coast, when you start adding things like, and maybe we need to do owner-occupied, maybe we need to do some of these very specific things, but that's something that should come out in the public process. And I think we could really limit ourselves if we start putting that stuff in here right now. And I know it's tough for the public, and it's tough for the Planning Commission, and I think a small population really, really wanted some specific language in here, but if this is where the council wants to go and we can get through this, I think we need to get language in there. I'll follow it, but I do lean a little more back to the original policy, because that's what we've talked about this comprehensive plan. We're just trying to get some language in there, much like the inclusionary zoning, but not make it so specific that we have to do it, and we have to do it in a specific way. So I'm a little torn. But I would love to support language in here, because we have neighborhoods that want it, so let them have it.
Okay. Councilmember Warner.
Yeah, I still prefer my previous one, and so I'm not going to support it. It's great to require owner occupancy, but we don't do a great job of enforcing that as it is, and there's not much, just like we don't enforce detached ADUs, and the idea that we'll do better enforcement in the future if we just pass this, I don't buy it. So I'm not going to support this.
I'm going to call the vote. So we have a motion in front of us to accept the policy H7 on the update of the city's ADU ordinance with priorities. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay, so motion carries 5-1. So with timing kind of running out on us today, I say that we could maybe submit any additional questions that we have to staff and see if we need an extension or a little bit more on our housing chapter. Okay, does that work for staff? Okay, and we're going to move into our public comment period. Again, I am going to keep this to 15 minutes. I'm going to see how many names I have on here to see if we... No, I'll do it. Okay, so we have 4 names, and you have 3 minutes, so that'll keep us in our 15 minutes. So we are going to start with Linda Twitchell, and I am going to keep the timer. So just give me 2 seconds to get ready here, Linda, and then you are going to be good to go.
You have no...
Okay.
Go. Okay. Linda Twitchell, Building Industry Association. I'll try and make this short. I think a re-examination of single-family housing definition is a good idea. If we are going to meet the growth expectations that we have projected, you're going to have to get serious about infill. To do that, we need variety in terms of housing sizes and types. We will be, hopefully next week, submitting to you guys a proposed pilot ordinance, somewhat like the one used in Kirkland in 2002, to allow pilot projects in residential areas that might show people what can be done. Just thought for the day. Okay, real quick, inclusionary zoning. A point that was not included here is that inclusionary zoning, while it might allow a few homes at a lower price that low income people can afford, what happens is you have, as in the only example that's ever come before City Council, which was in 2012, you have a certain number of homes. They try and pencil out what they can do with that. If you force prices on some of them to be lower, the developer is then forced essentially to raise the prices on the rest of them. This is, and don't laugh, Terry, this is the way it works. You know, you've got a specific amount of money you've got to make to cover it. They set the houses at market prices. If you drop some of them, the rest of the prices are going to go up. The example before you in 2012 was 200 or so units. About 30 of them, the price was going to go down. The price would have gone up 170. That was in a year when you had 100 residential building permits. So you can see what the effect, and we've written this out before, but just keep in mind. Okay, I am a bit concerned about the inexactitude of some of the information we're getting. I appreciate the work planning staff puts into all this, but we have some inconsistencies. For instance, Mr. Sepler himself has testified a couple of times that of the remaining residential lots in Bellingham, most of them, and the wording was most, are impacted by critical areas. Today, for the first time, I'm seeing the figure 47%. Okay. Is the comment that was also made then that our UGA is completely built out, is that also correct still? Or I mean, please push for exact figures, and let's try and figure out why we're getting inconsistencies in some of these presentations. The buildable lots, you had a map up here mentioning Kitech Phase 1. Kitech Phase 1 is almost done. Those are not buildable anymore. Those are gone bunnies. So I'm hoping the rest of that figure accurately, they're in Phase 2 now.
10 seconds.
Okay. Similarly, we had a map showing urban villages, good idea to do them because you don't have to provide infrastructure. Did you note that included the waterfront? You just talked about what it's going to cost for housing, et cetera. One other comment on procedure here. If you're going to consider public comment, if you could please do it before you start voting on things.
Linda, you're at time.
I'm done.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Kamani and Mary Kay, I've got you down here, so I've got Mary Kay, Roger, and Adam on my list here.
Thank you. Mary Kay Robinson, 2016 President of Whatcom County Association of Realtors. I listened to Mr. Suppler's testimony in the 6th and was a bit confused because at first he starts by discussing broad societal changes. The changes were not backed up by any facts or figures and were meant to support the planning position's staff. The staff as far as no new land was needed to meet population projections and housing preferences. I have a testimony to submit that has a spreadsheet that goes through each of those comments, and I want to put that as part of the public record. There is no evidence to support the testimony, nor can I find statistics that reinforce the statements he made. He cited Matthew Gardner, the chief economist for Windermere Real Estate, in his presentations. I watched that video. It's 1 minute and 42 seconds. Mr. Sepler made some very strong statements in reference to that video, but that video is in no way a comprehensive explanation of the important housing issues we face. A video of less than 2 minutes is in no way an answer to very serious concerns and questions raised at these meetings. I actually called Mr. Gardner and had a lengthy conversation with him regarding this testimony. In short, Mr. Gardner stated emphatically that the housing market was a perfect example of Economics 101, supply and demand. The GMA has the effect of creating artificial boundaries which constrict housing supply. That, in turn, puts upward pressure on prices. His view is that these boundaries actually exacerbate sprawl as people look outside city limits when they're unable to find what they want. Look at the outsized population growth in rural Whatcom County. The issues of builders not stepping up, as Mr. Sepler asserts, has nothing to do with the intransigence of builders. Rather, Mr. Gardner states the methodology of the GMA is fundamentally flawed, as there is no requirement for financial feasibility. Thus, the type of land left is very expensive to build on, so that projects just don't pencil out. Ergo, low inventory. He actually referred to some of the vacant land left as mountain goat lots. If council is interested, we could work to schedule Mr. Gardner to testify. The statements by Mr. Sepler are not based on a rigorous assessment of the facts, and from my research and statements, they're based on an idealistic agenda, the agenda of lots of urban villages, infill, and very little in single-family dwelling building in lieu of any additional land added to the UGA. And that's nice in theory, but the facts belie the reality. The infill toolkit's lack of success is one perfect example. If there is such great interest in the program, why is there only one example right now? Cherry-picking certain facts, painting a pretty picture to support a particular point of view never represents the whole truth. I urge you to have Michael Lewis present his independent research about Bellingham on the 18th of this month, August 8th or the 15th. Schedule another public hearing on housing, on land use, so that we can all hear the points of view. Only with an open mind and supporting factual documentation can we make the best decision for a community. And this is for the public record. Wherever that goes.
Thank you, Mary Kay.
Good afternoon, council members. Roger Almskar, land use consultant. I want to support what Mary Kay just said about the necessity, from our point of view, to get a chance to have Michael Lewis present his findings to you in person rather than just a copy of a report, which we will be delivering to the council within a week or so. I don't know if she said that some of us, I'm speaking for the Building Industry Association right now and also the local Citizens Alliance for Property Rights. You might wonder what's this got to do with property rights, but there are a few items in even the existing regulations that we feel are not legal according to the Supreme Court decisions on nexus and rough proportionality, but we won't get into detail on that right now. So the three organizations formed a coalition a few months ago. We hired Michael Lewis out of Bellevue as an independent person to look at our local situation in detail and write a report. It's about 20 pages long right now. It has a lot of information in it. So I think what I'd like you to think about is that here you have two of the largest professional trade organizations in the county, the BIA and the Realtors, and a civic organization called the Citizens Alliance for Property Rights, which is part of a statewide network. Mr. Bordeman said a few minutes ago that this is the most important chapter. I agree 100%, especially when you look at the headlines in the paper from all over the country pointing out that Bellingham has become one of the most expensive cities, certainly of its size, in the country in terms of housing. We have a problem, and I think I would like you to, whatever you're doing, to not forget about the problem and work on some solutions to it, and not in the long run, like 5 years from now, but in the next year or two. I know the staff is working on some amendments to some of the regulations. That's great. We at the BIA are working with some of them. I think I've covered the bases here. There wouldn't be a property rights group in Whatcom County if our land use regulations met 4 points. If they were all reasonable, if they were all clear and concise, if they avoided conflicts. We see a lot of conflicts among different regulations, especially when you look at some of what comes out of Olympia, and if they were effective or not. We all want to protect the environment, but we also want to have a decent income and a decent place to live. So I hope you will find it somewhere in your schedule in the next few weeks to give our group a chance to have Mr. Lewis present his findings. And we will certainly be getting you those reports by either this Friday or Monday. And we'll give you all a hard copy. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Okay, Adam.
Hello, my name is Adam Schaefer. I live on 3131 Ferry Avenue in Bellingham. And I am a program specialist with Opportunity Council working on criminal justice related issues. And all across the country, a lot of the solutions that communities are finding that work really well at addressing their criminal justice issues are they're adopting this housing first model for criminal justice reform. And it's this idea that if you can get people stable housing, they're much less likely to commit crimes, and their recidivism rates go down, and substance abuse issues and all these other kind of negative impacts of criminal justice issues start to go away if they have stable housing. And I think that some of the stuff in this housing chapter, like having inclusionary zones and exploring what we can do with a separate ADUs, would go a long way to make it so that we could have affordable housing. Just for me personally, I'm a student up in Western right now. I'm living in a rental right by campus, and so I assumed that when I'd be moving into that rental, it would all be college students there. But it's actually a lot of people that clearly are in their 40s and not probably going to Western Washington University. So there's a lot of people who I am competing with for our very low housing stock. And so by having inclusionary zones and enforcing developers to start building affordable housing for folks, we need more houses so that people can, start having actual houses to live in. Most of my friends who are in their 30s that, when they graduate from Western, they're still renting right now. They're not buying houses. And it would be nice for when I graduate from Western, I plan to stay in Bellingham, that I could buy a house and start building equity and start, having a good, solid future. But right now it seems like renting is the only solution. So, but having these inclusionary zones and forcing developers to start building affordable housing, I think it will alleviate a lot of issues, including having, houses for people to buy and then freeing up space for renters to also rent in. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so public comment, we can is still, sorry, okay.
Thank you, Paul Schisler. I'm an independent contractor, local community development planner. Speaking just for myself today. Thanks for the opportunity. I'd like to say a quick few quick things. First, the level of the discussion is so far advanced from where we were just 10 years ago, so I really appreciate that, and appreciate all the good work that's already in the comp plan draft. I'm also always interested to hear what the BIAWC has to say and the Realtors Association, so I look forward to seeing that report and and hearing what example from Kirkland Linda was suggesting. I'd also like to say that the city needs to continue to rely on people who work full-time on these issues, on the issues of housing that's affordable for people below median income. I know the BIWC cares about that, and the realtors do too, but their work is almost exclusively for housing that is affordable at the median income or above the median income, and almost none of their members deal with housing that is below the median income. So I would ask you to look for other voices like Michael from Bellevue, but others who spend a lot of time on this. There are national experts that can show you examples of what has been working elsewhere to lead to a more inclusive mixed neighborhoods like neighborhoods used to be. A mix of housing, mix of people. I think that's a healthier way to go. So I'm sure you can find those experts, and I know of some. I'm very involved in the Community Land Trust strategy nationally, and there's good examples that that organization is promoting. I also wanted to say it really comes down to a couple things. It comes down to some policy choices that this city like Bellingham has, but it also relies on funding in the combination of low-cost, no-cost policies, and the need for additional funding, especially non-local funding, is essential if we're going to fix this problem. And then we need the capacity locally to use those policies and those non-local funding sources. And the capacity is in the WIWC. Those general contractors and suppliers are the ones that need to be working with the government, the public sector, and the private nonprofit sector. The three together is a really powerful combination, and you won't be able to get anything below median income affordability.
30 seconds.
You won't be able to get anything below median income affordability unless you have all three. The government doing everything it can do, asking the private for-profit sector to do everything it can do, and the nonprofit sector playing its role. It's a combination of those three sectors. It's a combination of funding, policy, and building our local capacity so we have a housing supply that matches what the incomes are, that we fix the housing mismatch so the housing costs match up to the range of incomes we have, you know, from zero income to whatever the top-end millionaires make. They all have access to affordable homes. But the real problem is at the median income and below, where we get nothing unless we work together.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Okay, we have used our 15 minutes, so I'm going to close the public comment period. But again, public comment is open for written submissions if anyone wishes to still add something for that. And we will continue on our housing chapter. And I don't know what the timing is going to be on that, but we will certainly let the public know what this will look like in the future as we go along. Okay, so we are going to move to meeting minutes. We have one set for June 20th for our committee meeting.
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Okay, old or new business. Oh, you're so good, Council. Okay, so we are going to move into executive session. We will have a report out in our regular meeting tonight. We have executive sessions are closed to a public, and there are two sessions, one potential litigation and another on collective bargaining, contract negotiations, Luckstrom, approximately 10 minutes. So 20 minutes. I will be back here at 5 after 5 to adjourn or extend. Thank you all for coming.